Chapter 323. Qingshui's Circle. This was a world that had existed for more than hundreds of millions of years. The origin of the world had long been untraceable. Only in the ancient mythological books collected by various cultivation sects could it be found sporadically. But the only thing that could be confirmed was that there had been a sage in this world. After hundreds of millions of years of development, the whole Qingshui circle consisted of 3 provinces, hundreds of large regions, and many overseas islands. Cultivation was prevalent, and there were countless large and small sections. Jiuzhou region was just an inconspicuous small region among hundreds of large regions. However, in the past 1,000 years, the name of Jiuzhou region was well known. Even the top cultivation forces in Shaanxian province knew this name. In the entire Qingshui circle, anyone who had a little understanding of cultivation affairs would be familiar with this name. Not for anything else, but because it was the source of the bloody accident of samsara that killed countless cultivation geniuses in major sects. Back then, the first holy girl of Yushu's sect opened the reincarnation mirror, and countless talents entered it to compete for opportunities. Every time I think of all kinds of grand occasions, I feel excited. But hundreds of years later, the treasure reincarnation only reached the 2nd level. A large number of cultivation geniuses and future giants died in it, and their souls were destroyed. All the major sects were in a panic and gathered in one place to find a solution. But in less than a year, the remaining 99% of the geniuses in the reincarnation mirror died. On that day, the sky of our Jiuzhou region was blood red. Unfortunately, in the end, the reincarnation mirror collapsed by itself and broke into countless pieces and scattered in all circles. No one could know the truth of that year. Next to a low and dilapidated village, under a shady big banyan tree, a white-bearded old man in a patch coat was holding a cattail leaf fan. He couldn't help sighing, as if he was recalling the tragic situation of that year, and the wrinkles on his face were all bunched up. In front of him, several little radishes, who seemed to be no more than 4 or 5 years old, tilted their heads and blinked with a puzzled look. However, they were still full of interest, squatting beside the old man and unwilling to leave. There were no cultivators in the village, and only the young men in the family practiced martial arts. There were no teachers either. The funniest person in the village was the old farmer who liked to talk about immortals. However, the things that the old farmer said were interesting to the adults in the village at first, and they treated it as a fairy tale. Later, the old farmer said it too many times, and it was inevitable that people would get annoyed. As a result, after several years, as long as the old farmer sat down and wanted to say something, the other villagers would find an excuse to leave. Only a group of children would never get tired of it. However, despite this being the case, the old farmer still said it again and again. Regardless of whether others heard it or not, he had to say it for himself to hear. If he didn't say it, then the pain in his heart would be impossible to get rid of, and he would go mad from resentment. The old farmer took this to heart and never mentioned it to anyone. "Old Huang, you're still going on and on about it? All the sweet potatoes in your field have been stolen by Buttface, who lives by the river." When the woman who came out to feed the chickens saw the situation under the tree, an unhappy expression flashed across her face. She immediately shouted loudly. The old farmer's complexion immediately changed. He staggered as he got up. He didn't care that he had lost a straw shoe and ran towards his sweet potato field, causing the children to burst into laughter. After the old farmer left, the children felt quite bored. A group of children ran to the woman, and a little fat boy jumped out and hugged her, calling her mother coquettishly. The woman immediately beamed with joy. Seeing that most of the other families were girls, she was quite complacent. She didn't forget to warn her son, "Dainyu, don't listen to Grandpa Huang." Yes, everything he said was a lie. "I know." The little fat boy nodded his head obediently. Then he couldn't help but ask curiously, "Mother, are there really immortals in this world? What is the cultivation that Grandpa Huang mentioned?" The woman rolled her eyes. "If there are so many immortals, why is your Grandpa Huang still farming in our village? Don't talk about cultivation. Go back and practice your strength. Or, how can you be a hunter in the future? Oh, the little fat boy responded and was no longer curious. The woman looked at the remaining girls who hadn't left. She turned into the house and took out a bag of dried sweet potatoes. Maybe one of them would be her son's daughter-in-law in the future. It was always good to leave a good impression. However, when she got to the last girl, the smile on her face immediately faded. She fumbled around in the bag and only took out one sweet potato. In the end, she seemed to think it was too much, so she added another sweet potato and placed it in the girl's hand. You little girl, don't play around. Go back and take care of your father. The girl lowered her head and silently put away the dried sweet potato. She didn't say anything and left. She was heading for her home. Seeing her go far, the woman withdrew her gaze. Her face immediately became stern. She pulled her son's ear and scolded. How many times have I told you? Don't play with this jinx. Why don't you listen to me? The little fat boy was dissatisfied this time and shouted, Mother, isn't Aria a little ugly? She's a good person and often goes to the mountain to bring snacks for us. Why don't you let me play with her? The woman immediately got angry. She grabbed the little fat boy and began to spank him. Are you still not obedient? When did I hurt you? In that area, how could she be ugly? If you play with her again, other brothers and sisters will not play with you. The little fat boy was beaten and cried. Coupled with the serious consequences his mother said, he suddenly shouted, Mother, stop it, Dad. Come and save me. I won't play with Aria anymore. At this moment, in front of the sweet potato field, Huang stopped on the ridge of the field panting. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. All the sweet potatoes in the field were not missing. The little wife of the Zhang family was really eloquent. What she said seemed to be true, which almost made him run half to death. Well, I'll talk to the old boy of the Zhang family later. After 2 breaths, Huang turned around and was about to go back, but he found another thin girl standing on the ridge of the field. The little girl's skin was very white, as if the fierce sunlight couldn't leave a single trace on her body. However, this kind of whiteness was mostly due to malnutrition. Her thin and small body gave the illusion that she could be crushed with one hand. She was so thin that she did not look like a child of 7 or 8 years old at all, so she still mingled with children of 4 or 5 years old. But even so, the crisscrossing, spiderweb-like scars on her face still made it impossible for her to find a playmate. The atmosphere was silent for a while. Huang was surprised. The iconic scars on her face quickly reminded him who the little girl in front of him was. Aren't you Aria from the east side of the river? Aria nodded and rarely said, Grandpa, can you tell me the story of the first holy girl of Yushu sect again? At this time, Huang was surprised to find that Aria's voice was not as rough as that of her mother, who was transferred to another family. Instead, it was like the sound of an empty valley, sweet and beautiful. At least, Huang had never heard such a beautiful voice in the area where mortals lived in his life, except in that place. But seeing the scars on Aria's face, Huang shook his head regretfully and did not say much. He sat on the ridge, patted the place beside him, and said kindly, Come and sit down. I will tell you. You're the first one who is not tired of listening to me for 3 years. In this respect, you are better than Antly in the village. From 4 years old to 7 years old, the child still wanted to listen, which surprised Huang himself. Aria seemed to hear that Huang was praising her, and a smile appeared on her face. But the scars moved with the smile, which was more terrible than not smiling. After all, Huang was a person who had seen the big world. Seeing this, he did not show any different expression. Instead, he pondered for a moment and laughed in a low voice. For the sake of listening to my story for 3 years, I will tell you something different this time. But what I tell you today, you can't tell others. Can you do that? Aria nodded. She had no friends. As for her father, it was even more impossible for her to tell him anything. Huang seemed to understand this and quickly got into the mood. He gritted his teeth and said, Actually, in those days, I was an ordinary handyman of Yushu sect, and I was on the mount of the first holy girl. Aria showed curiosity. She did not understand why she was interested in these things, but children would not think so much. She wanted to know, so she came to listen. Obviously, Huang would tell her more stories today. Huang seemed to be lost in memories, and his eyes were full of fanaticism and longing. The world of immortals is beyond the imagination of mortals. They fly in the sky and are omnipotent. But those immortals do not call themselves immortals, but call themselves cultivators. More commonly, they call themselves practitioners. I didn't know this until I joined the sect. The first holy girl of Yushu sect was really a fairy-like figure. In those days, Huang had a great time talking, and Arya was also fascinated. Time passed quickly, and soon it was dark. Huang had no choice but to postpone the story. After sending Arya to the east side of the river, he turned home. Arya's family lived in the east side of the river. If he did not send her home, he would not be at ease. He had lived alone for a long time these years and felt too lonely. In addition, Arya was not tired of his nagging, so he had the idea of adopting her. However, every time he thought of Arya's troublesome father, Huang could only give up. In the east side of the river, there were mostly wastelands, and only one piece of land was reclaimed, which was the one in front of Arya's family. More than 10 years ago, there were more villagers in the east side of the river than in the west side of the river. But because of many disasters, only Arya's family stayed in the east side of the river. Squeak! In front of the earthen courtyard covered with thatch, Arya carefully pushed the door open and poked her head in. Her ears and eyes were faintly filled with panic and fear. Seeing that there was no one in the courtyard, Arya breathed a sigh of relief. She rushed in, closed the door, and walked to the earthen stove in the corner of the courtyard to start a fire to cook. But before the fire could be ignited, a faint voice filled with anger suddenly rang out. Chapter 3:24. Hearing the sound, Arya was so scared that her body trembled. The firewood in her hands scattered on the ground, but she didn't pick it up. Instead, she stepped over the firewood and ran away. Behind her, the man with a hideous scar on his face limped to her. He looked like a ferocious ghost. "How dare you run away? You are a loser. You still want to find that bitch." Arya shook her head in horror, but the man was still excited. He bent down to pick up a firewood on the ground and smashed it at Arya's head. "Today, I will beat you to death, you loser." Arya let out a scream of horror. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and dodged with her flexible and petite body. The firewood smashed on the ground and broke into 2 pieces. The sound made Arya's heart tremble. If it hit her, it must be very painful. She didn't want to feel pain anymore. "Daddy, I didn't mean it." Arya ran around the yard and begged. Arya was just playing and delayed the time. "I won't do it again. Daddy, please spare my life." "You are lying. You just want to run away. That bitch left me. Do you want me to die so that you can rely on her? You come back so late to cook. Do you want me to starve to death?" As the man said, a red madness appeared in his eyes. He turned back and tightened the door bolt, continuing to chase and beat Arya. Although Arya was flexible, she was still young and couldn't take big steps. In the end, she gradually ran out of strength and was caught and beaten violently. "Cry. You only know how to cry. Go and cook for me." Clang! The man swung the stick, and the madness in his eyes faded away. He turned back to the house. Arya hugged her knees and curled up in the corner of the mud wall. She sobbed in a low voice and wiped the blood on her arms with her small hands. When a man's voice came again in the house, she had to bear the pain in her body and got up to make a fire to cook. Hiss! The cold well water soaked her small hands. Arya took a deep breath and felt the pain in the wounds on her hands lessen. Then she began to wash the rice. The blood in the wounds inevitably flowed into the water, but soon it was diluted and invisible. Suddenly, she was slightly stunned. Just now she seemed to see a wisp of black air flashing in the rice water. It condensed into a dot and finally bloomed like a black lotus. Illusion? The young girl didn't think too much about it. She blinked her eyes in confusion and continued to wash the rice. Being beaten, begging for mercy, working, this scene seemed to be repeated every few days. The only difference was that the man's temperament became more and more violent. When he was angry, his eyes would be scarlet red, and he would lose his mind. When it was serious, he wouldn't even know what he was doing. He was like a bottle that was about to be filled to the brim with sand. Every day, sand was forcibly stuffed into the bottle. One day in the future, when the sand reached a certain limit, the bottle would definitely crack open. The man who was deeply involved did not notice the cause of such a situation. The young and ignorant Arya did not even have the slightest association. She just obediently obeyed her horrible biological father every day. Early the next morning, the rooster crowed from the west side of the river. Arya, who was half asleep, immediately got up to make breakfast. The painful memory of yesterday was still very clear. After making breakfast, she opened the door, but did not find her father's limping figure. When she was wondering, suddenly there was a burst of messy footsteps outside the door. Arya looked back and immediately saw Huang, who told her a story yesterday, and several respectable old people in the village. Looking at Arya holding the breakfast with a confused look on her face, a faint pity flashed across the faces of the few old people, but it soon disappeared. Although they were the good people in the village, no one wanted to touch this ugly little girl. Well, Huang, take her to kowtow to her father first. The village head, standing in the middle, said, turned around and left, and then the rest also left. Huang snorted, and sarcasm flashed in his eyes. When he looked back and saw Arya, he walked in slowly and picked her up. Girl, your life is really hard. You will live with your grandpa in the future. What happened to my father? Arya asked cautiously, with a well-hidden expectation in her eyes. Huang sighed. It seems that he knocked his foot last night. Your father fell into the river and drowned. One day later, with the help of many villagers, there was a new grave on the top of the hill. Arya, dressed in linen clothes, cried her heart out. Her voice could be heard from far away, which made many farmers watching from a distance feel sorry for her. This girl is so pitiful. She has never encountered a good thing since she was born. Otherwise, why is she called a jinx? She's just died. Don't say a few words. The woman immediately shut up. She didn't want to be possessed by a ghost in the middle of the night. The village head, leaning on his crutch, looked at Huang standing behind Arya and comforted her gently. He shook his head and sighed. Fortunately, Huang is willing to adopt this girl. She is blessed. Everyone immediately echoed. Everyone knows Su Silen's bad temper. When his mother and wife were still alive, he often beat his mother. How could Xiaowei, a girl, bear it? If she hadn't run away with a wild man, I'm afraid that she would have died of anger like Su Silen's mother. Angered to death? Someone sneered. Who knows whether she was angered to death or beaten to death? After Su Silen's mother died, he immediately cremated her. Obviously, he had a guilty conscience. I think the plague 7 years ago must have something to do with Su Silen. The unfilial son was struck by lightning, and so many neighbors were implicated. The more people talked, the more excited they were. They didn't notice that the old man and the young girl had come down from the mountain. Huang was confused and couldn't help but ask, "What are you talking about?" As soon as they saw Arya, there was an instant silence, and the atmosphere became strange. The village head's face trembled, and a trace of unnaturalness flashed through his eyes. He tried to avoid Arya's innocent eyes and looked at Huang, saying, "When these things happened, you had not come to our village. I will tell you the details later. You see, Arya is tired. Go back and have a rest." Huang nodded and nodded. "Then I will see you in the evening." The village head nodded and watched Huang leave with Arya. A group of villagers immediately surrounded him and said hurriedly, "Village head, you can't say what happened 7 years ago." "Yes," the fat boy's mother echoed. "Village head, think about it. If you tell Huang what happened 7 years ago, he will definitely think of Arya. If he doesn't want Arya, you will suffer. If none of us raises her and she dies, your position as the village head will come to an end." Enough. Seeing that they were going too far, Elder Li's face turned red with anger. He slammed his crutch on the ground and said in a deep voice, "I know what I'm doing. Even if something happens, it won't be your turn to be in trouble. Disperse." The fat boy's mother rolled her eyes and was not afraid of the village head at all. "Our kindness is regarded as ill intent. Let's go." The remaining women also said a few words in a strange tone before turning around and leaving. Old village head, they are all narrow-minded. Please don't take it to heart. Yes, they're all women. They are not sensible. The only hunters in the village comforted him and left one after another. Only the village head stood there with a gloomy look. No one knew what he was thinking. When Huang took Arya back to his home, Arya immediately ran to the stove and was ready to work. Huang was so scared that he picked Arya up and scolded. "What do you want to do? My stove can't stand your tossing. Go and play. I'll cook." Arya's eyes became watery instantly. Huang was confused. Finally, he heard Arya said in tears, "Grandpa, I can cook. I can go up the mountain to collect firewood. I could do everything. Grandpa, don't leave me." Huang was stunned and looked at the little girl who was picked up by him. He didn't do anything. Why did she think that he didn't want her? Suddenly, he fixed his eyes and saw the wounds on Arya's hands. His face immediately became gloomy. He sat down with Arya in his arms and opened the linen covering her wrists. Sure enough, just like his face, he was covered in scars, and many of them were fresh. "Son of a bitch. If I had known, I would." He couldn't help cursing and immediately felt guilty. There were too many wounds on Arya's face. Besides, the girl usually wrapped herself tightly, so he didn't notice it. "Little girl, Grandpa will never abandon you. You will follow me in the future. As long as I can do it, you don't have to do any rough work. You can learn needlework like other girls. Oh, by the way, I can read. I will teach you to read." The night was as cold as water. On the newly arranged bed, Arya had fallen asleep peacefully. There were still tears in her eyes, but she didn't panic after being comforted by Huang. Huang chuckled, and an unprecedented sense of warmth rose in his heart. He spent most of his life in Yushu sect in order to seek immortality and learn the Tao. His relatives had long died or separated, not to mention getting married and having children. Now he suddenly had a granddaughter. Huang really wanted to leave all the good things to her. It's almost time. Let's see what Oldie will say. 7 years ago, the girl was just born. What happened at that time? With doubts, Huang gently closed the door and turned to the old village head's house. Soon, Huang came to the old village head's fence and saw the village head sitting on a stone stool outside the house, waiting for him with a lighted candle. Seeing Huang, the village head nodded and said, "Come in. The door is open." After Huang pushed the door and sat down, the village head looked at him deeply. Seeing the remaining joy on his face, he seemed to understand something. He didn't confirm anything and said directly. Chapter 325. 10 years ago, in Tia village, Su Silin became the best hunter in the village by virtue of his strength and married his wife, Xiaowei. He lived a good life. Although he was a little grumpy, he didn't beat his wife and mother. After a year of marriage, Xiaowei was pregnant, which made Su Silin very happy. Su's mother even told everyone she met that her daughter-in-law was pregnant and would definitely give birth to a big fat boy. Maybe because she said too much and violated the taboo, Xiaowei finally gave birth to a daughter. Although Su Silin and Su's mother were not very happy, they didn't show it. Then, less than a year later, Xiaowei was pregnant with the second child. This time, Su Silin and his mother didn't say a word, waiting for the birth of the child in Xiaowei's belly. But this time it was a daughter. Su Silin finally got angry and didn't even bother to name the child. He beat his wife, who was still weak. When they quarreled, the fine jewelry scratched the second daughter's face, and the blood was everywhere. Recalling this, the village head sighed. This is Arya. Later, the villagers went to mediate and kindly cleaned his family, but Xiaowei was disheartened and took her eldest daughter back to her mother's home. Later, I heard that she remarried and there was no news of her. Su Silin's mother died of anger not long after that. Just a few days after that day, the people on the east side of the river were infected with the plague, and everyone was crazy and had a bad temper. All the clinics in the town were occupied by our village. It took about half a year for the illness of the people on the east side of the river to get better. After getting better, they moved away one by one. In less than a month, all of them left, except Su Silin's family. It's strange that Arya was just born at that time. She should be the most susceptible to infection, but she was the only one who didn't get sick. I sent her to the nanny in the village to drink milk. She was very obedient. Maybe it was God's pity for her. Huang nodded with a gloomy face. In this way, since the girl was born, she had suffered many misfortunes and never had a good day. Oldly, I understand what you're saying. Huang clapped his hands on his thighs and said in a deep voice, Arya has had a hard life since she was a child, and I have been alone all my life. It's best for us to be companions. As long as I am alive, I will never let her suffer. Village Chief Li was overjoyed when he heard that. He finally got rid of one of his worries. It can't be better that you think so. Arya is so lucky. Huang responded and did not say anything else. They chatted for a while and then went home. The next morning, Arya woke up and sat up from the bed. She was stunned for a moment before she realized that she was no longer in the east of the river. Her biological father was dead. Now, Arya thought of something. She suddenly jumped out of bed and ran out barefoot. The morning sun shone into the yard through the mist. Arya saw Huang, who was about to make breakfast, at a glance. Her bright eyes flashed with light, and she shouted, "Grandpa!" Huang shivered and almost put his hand in the fire. He looked up and saw Arya. He couldn't help but grin. He immediately came over and scolded her with a smile. "You little girl, the ground is so cold. Why don't you wear shoes?" Arya just giggled and said nothing. Huang was happy to see her. She was indeed a child. It seemed that her father's death had no effect on her. "Girl, Grandpa will give you a name today, okay?" Huang sat on the threshold with Arya in his arms. "Arya is your nickname. I will send you to school in the future. You can't always be called this name." Arya nodded obediently. Her pretty eyes were full of expectation. "Grandpa, please give me a name." Huang grinned and immediately thought hard, his brows knitted together. However, although he had some unusual experiences, he was uneducated. It was very difficult for him to think of a name suddenly. "Your father's surname is Su. Although he doesn't treat you well, you still need this surname," Huang muttered. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and his heart, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly beat vigorously. There was no doubt that there was a bold idea in his mind at this moment. But as soon as this idea came up, he could no longer suppress it. There was a custom in the village. If a child was weak and sick when he was young, he should give him a cheap name so that he could be fed. Therefore, there were many people named Urgazi or Shurdan in the village. But if he had a bad life like Arya, he should give him a great name to change his life. What was the greatest name? And the surname was Su. There was only one candidate in Huang's mind. Although the owner of the Mount of Holy Girl of Yushu's sect had changed when he went up the mountain decades ago, and most of what he said to Arya was bragging, but he remembered the legendary name very clearly. This name is a taboo in the cultivation circle, but Arya is just a mortal, and there are so many people with the same name. Huang's eyes became brighter and brighter. Finally, he made up his mind and said, "Arya, you will be called Su Li from now on. Li, as in hearty." Boom! Su Li. This name, Arya's mind was blank, and her face became pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. Her lips trembled, and she let out a shrill howl. She held her head and kept shouting, "Su Li, Su Li, Lingli, Lingli, Lingli." Huang saw that Arya was stimulated, and his face changed with fear. "Girl, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me. It's my fault not to call you Su Li." Arya. Looking at Arya, who was getting more and more strange, Huang panicked for a moment and finally reacted. He held Arya and went to the clinic. At this moment, Arya suddenly calmed down, stopped talking, and stopped trembling. Everything returned to normal. Huang was confused. He put down Arya and looked up and down at Arya, who closed her eyes. He really didn't know why a name could make Arya have such a big reaction. At this moment, Arya suddenly opened her eyes. Her pupils were dark, as deep as the starry sky. "I am Su Li." She suddenly opened her mouth, and her childish voice sounded again. It was more stable than before, but Huang, who had only been in contact with her for a short time, did not notice it. Instead, he nodded and said happily, "Let's go." "Yes, you are Su Li." At this moment, he not only didn't worry, but also felt lucky for his decision. Aria's appearance, just now, was mostly the blessing of the great holy girl. All kinds of magic in the cultivation circle were really beyond his estimation. "Grandpa, I'm a little tired and I want to rest for a while," Suli said after a moment of silence. Huang didn't doubt her and nodded. "Go ahead. You're growing up. Sleep more. I will call you when I cook breakfast." Suli responded and turned back. Her pace was no longer brisk. Although Huang felt that something was wrong, he was happy, so he didn't care much about it. He turned around and went to work. Suli returned to the room and looked at the newly made bed. She frowned and didn't say anything. After a long time, she stretched out her hand and pricked the Naguan acupoint on her wrist. Then nothing happened. "It seems that I have really left the reincarnation mirror and returned to Qing Shui's circle." Su Li, who had just recovered her memory, was confused again. Her soul had been destroyed in front of the spirit of the reincarnation mirror, and there was no possibility of reincarnation. But now she not only reincarnated, but also fully recovered her memory. What happened on Earth? After a while of contemplation, Huang's voice sounded outside the house. She had to put aside distractions for a while, and her eyes flashed. No matter what, she had to get through the current predicament first. This body was too weak, and a little bigger danger could make her return to nothingness. This feeling was not very good. Huang mostly planted sweet potatoes, so he only had sweet potato porridge for breakfast. After breakfast, Huang went to work in the field, leaving Suli alone at home, which gave her enough time to think. It is not difficult to guess what Huang said. This place is not far from Yushu sect, but people in Tia village obviously have not contacted cultivators. This place is extremely remote, and the threat is only at the level of wild beasts, which gives me a chance to recover. Thinking of this, Suli touched the position of the ring finger of her right hand. She could feel that the ring was still there, but it couldn't be revealed because she didn't have cultivation. Black Lotus Ring of Ghost Clan. Did she take me to reincarnate? This thought inevitably arose in her mind, and Suli thought of all the things that happened in the east of the river before. After recovering her memory, the power of her soul soared, and she remembered every detail since she was born clearly. The desolation in the east of the river, the plague, and the violent death of Su Silin and others were all caused by her blood. Her blood seemed to be related to Black Lotus Ring, and it had all kinds of unpredictable and strange characteristics. It might be right to be called the Jinx. Thinking of this, Suli smiled and didn't feel guilty. If Su Silin took care of her carefully, there would not be so many disasters in the east of the river. It could only be said that karma was not good. Stepping on the path of cultivation again, I know the most complete method of cultivation in this life. Sitting cross-legged in the room, Suli meditated and said nothing. Yushu sect had Yushu tactics, which was a rare mental method in the cultivation circle. Although she was a talented genius in the past, it was absolutely difficult for her to cultivate the top-grade Jinan realm in just 600 years without a good mental method. In this life, she obviously had a better choice. I was trapped in the mirror at that time, and I didn't know it. I only thought that AO sword skills was a unique skill. Now it seems that it is a top holy method of cultivation that integrates mental method and swordsmanship into one. Maybe I can use it as the foundation in this life. Ghost Valley Meditation Direction is also a holy method of cultivation, but specializes in healing, and its power is too low. If I practice this method, I can only be controlled by others, which is not what I want. Most of the practice methods collected in other reincarnation mirror were superior mental methods, and many of them were holy methods. Holy method. It was extremely rare in the top sects in Qing Shui's circle. It could be seen how valuable the mental method of reincarnation mirror was. No wonder so many people were jealous of it. Su Li sighed softly, and several figures flashed through her mind. Then she shook her head gently to get rid of the distracting thoughts, and stood up to make the starting gesture of AO sword skills. Chapter 326. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of mechanism turning suddenly sounded in her ears. Suli stopped and frowned to listen. but found that the sound came from her body. She had reincarnated, and there should be nothing left in her body. How could there be such a strange sound? Suli couldn't be careless when she re-practiced. To be cautious, she didn't practice AO sword skills again, but sat down by the bed and quietly looked for the source of the sound in her body. After sensing for a moment, Suli seemed to have gained something. She raised her right hand and naturally began to run a secret method that she had never learned. Then, a black, quaint ring finally emerged on the surface of her skin, and the black lotus on it was rotating slowly. The sound came from here. Su Li's immature face showed contemplation, which was completely inconsistent with her age. She couldn't understand. In the illusion, Black Lotus Ring had no other effect except sticking to her. Why did it move so frequently after she was inexplicably reincarnated? Was it because her bloodline had reached a certain standard under the influence of Black Lotus Ring? Since she couldn't figure it out, Suli didn't think too much. After waiting patiently for a while, Black Lotus Ring finally stopped rotating. At the same time, Suli's expression also changed subtly. She actually sensed a spirit from Black Lotus Ring that was so small that it was almost undetectable. Device spirit? Did this Black Lotus Ring also have a device spirit, like the reincarnation mirror? Suli looked a little colder. Her experience in the reincarnation mirror made her have no good impression on these device spirits. At this moment, the device spirit of Black Lotus sent a wave with great difficulty. It seemed that because it was too weak, the wave was intermittent. After Suli received all of it, she understood it, and her eyes became clear. The Ghost Clan regarded Black Lotus as a sacred object. In their view, the Dark Lotus symbolized their clan walking in the dark. Any existence that tried to insult the Black Lotus would be hated by the Ghost Clan. This Black Lotus Ring was naturally the sacred treasure of the Ghost Clan. Suli thought it funny. What was Qi Xianxing thinking? He gave a sacred treasure of the Ghost Clan to her, a human clan, for safekeeping, and now she actually had some kind of inseparable connection with the Black Lotus Ring. Was there anything more ridiculous in this world? Even with her experience as the holy girl of Yushu's sect, she felt it was incredible. Perhaps I'm not a pure human in this life. This thought flashed through Su Li's mind. She thought of the strange effect of her blood. Wasn't it the talent of the Ghost Clan that Tantai Feng mentioned? What the Black Lotus Ring spirit sent was not only a simple message, but also a piece of awkward-sounding words that could be tentatively called a pithy formula. She said tentatively because she had never seen such a weird practice method, which completely deviated from common sense. In Su Li's understanding, if she started to practice it, there was only a dead end. Perhaps the ghost race's cultivation method was like this? The cultivation method that could be preserved by the sacred object of the Ghost Clan could not be rubbish. Maybe it was a higher cultivation method than AO sword skills. If she really had the body of a ghost, she might be able to cultivate successfully. Suli hesitated for a while. What she worried about was not the difference between human and ghost, but the danger of cultivation. After experiencing so much, she didn't care so much about the boundary between the human clan and the ghost clan. Although Tantai Feng repeatedly warned her not to have any relationship with the ghost clan, but whether her master Qi Xianqing was sincere to her, she could see it clearly with her own eyes. Taking a deep breath, Su Li's eyes were a little more cautious. The Ghost Clan's cultivation method had always been famous for its weirdness, and there must be a lot of danger to practice it. She was only 7 years old in this life, and her physical body had not been tempered. She couldn't stand the toss at all. If this Ghost Clan's cultivation method was really overbearing, she might accidentally lose her life again. After thinking about it again and again, Su Li finally sighed and gave up the idea of practicing this nameless Ghost Clan's cultivation method. At this moment, another thought came from Black Lotus Ring. After the thought was sent, the spirit seemed to reach the limit of weakness and soon fell into silence again. Su Li could no longer sense any pneuma of it. The content of this thought was more than the last time. Although Su Li's soul still maintained the characteristics of sharp sixth senses, it was only the level of ordinary children in terms of strength. so it took a long time to digest it. After a full hour, Suli suddenly opened her eyes, and there was an unconcealable shock and gloominess on her face. The message from the spirit didn't recur, which could be said to be extremely simple, but for Suli, it was not easy to be shocked. The body of evil ghost? She was actually the body of evil ghost that was not tolerated by the natural law in this life. Suli had never heard of the origin of this kind of physique before, but the spirit explained very clearly that her physique could adapt to the cultivation method of the ghost clan or the human clan, and no matter what the nature of the mental method was, she could show extremely strong talent. As long as there was enough energy support, it was not a dream for her to recover to Jindan realm in a short time. But everything had a limit. The physique like Su Li, which could be improved without limit, must not be tolerated by the natural law. She was even regarded as a natural enemy by the natural law and was killed by a chess piece. How difficult it was to grow up under the eyes of the natural law. In the Ghost Clan, the body of evil ghost had always been a taboo. If it was born, it would only be regarded as an ominous person and thrown into the endless void, leaving it to fend for itself. Among the human clan, as long as it was heard that the body of evil ghost appeared, the whole clan would hunt it down until it was annihilated. It could be said that the body of evil ghost was a mouse that everyone wanted to beat. Once it was found, there was no way to survive. Oh, after taking a breath, Suli looked slightly pale, and there was a little cold sweat on her forehead. The whole world was her enemy. She was really the enemy of the whole world. For her, who had not yet started to re-practice, the pressure was too great. This lifetime would surely be more difficult than any of the lifetimes she'd experienced. She had to be careful with every single step she took and couldn't give herself away in the slightest. Otherwise, she would be easily crushed by the heaven Tao like an ant. After a long time, when the stooped figure of Huang appeared at the door, Suli spat out a foul breath and restrained all the emotions in her heart, but her face was inevitably a little pale. Seeing her, Huang walked over worriedly, touched Su Li's forehead full of cold sweat, and said with concern, "Girl, are you uncomfortable? Tell me, and I will take you to the clinic to have a look." Suli shook her head and forced a smile. "I'm fine, Grandpa. I just had a nightmare." Huang breathed a sigh of relief. It's okay. It was normal for this girl to have nightmares just a few days after her father's death. But in the afternoon, he would go to the clinic in the town to buy some tranquilizer medicine to recuperate for this girl. Thinking in his heart, Huang didn't say much to Su Li and turned to make lunch. After Huang left, Su Li's dark eyes flashed. She was naturally grateful to Huang. If he didn't mention the name Su Li, she didn't know how many years it would take for her to recover her memory. Maybe she would expose her body of evil ghost in a muddle and die again inexplicably. She must repay such a great kindness, but unfortunately, she couldn't do it now. She didn't know whether Huang could wait for the day when she could repay him at his age. Huang quickly made lunch, which was just some simple vegetables and sweet potatoes. Seeing Su Li eating with relish, Huang smiled and nodded slightly, and then frowned. This little girl's body was still growing, so she couldn't eat without some nutrition. However, those fish and meat weren't something that he could afford just by growing sweet potatoes. I heard that the town dock is still short of people. Although I am old, I can move it with the basic mental method I learned in Yushu's sect. As for the sweet potato field, I will take care of it in the morning and evening, Huang thought in his heart. After telling Su Li to stay at home obediently, he ran away without a trace. Su Li naturally didn't care about Huang, and she was no longer in a hurry to restore her cultivation as before. Instead, she closed the door and went out. If she rashly practiced and leaked the energy of evil ghost in her body, she might be noticed immediately and lead to a dead end. In this way, she could only postpone the practice plan. She was still very weak and was not even an ant in front of natural law. If she could arrange a simple tactical matrix to isolate Pneuma, she should be able to completely cover up her Pneuma. But how could she get the materials of the tactical matrix? Su Li felt a little headache. The universal currency of the cultivation circle was spiritual stones. She had no spiritual stones at all, and she didn't have enough cultivation to rob. This seemed to be a dead knot. While wandering on the ridge, Suli unconsciously came to the bank of Taishui River. She sat down and put her feet in the water. Looking at the clear river, the fish kept swimming around her little feet. This river could be said to be the lifeline of Tia village. All the people relied on it for water, food, and drink, so it was also fabricated with all kinds of magic. The little fatty told her that this river had a history of nearly 1,000 years. 1,000 years ago, Taishui River was not only about 6 feet wide as it was now, but a big river with no end in sight. Later, the world suddenly changed, and Taishui River also changed. The originally invisible water became solid, as hard as iron, and felt like a mirror. No one could scoop out a drop of water, and many people starved to death. People all said that the river god was angry and sent many sacrifices every year, but Taishui River still didn't change at all. Later, people living near Taishui River all moved away in order to survive, and the reputation of Taishui River also spread. As time passed, it gradually became a legend. Now, this ordinary river, which had dried up and shrunk like a thin willow and was no bigger than a ditch, was the legendary Taishui River. People in Tia village naturally didn't believe it. They just took it as a myth and put gold on their faces by the way. Anyway, it could be related to magic, and mortals would not refuse it. Area. When she was thinking randomly, Suli suddenly heard a familiar voice. She looked up and found it was the little fatty. It seemed that after these 2 days of practice, this brat had already thrown his mother's instructions to the back of his mind. Chapter 3:27. Suli frowned and didn't want to pay attention to the little fatty. But on second thought, she felt it was inappropriate. Before recovering her memory, she would never refuse any invitation from a playmate. Besides, she had nothing else to do now. Brother, wait for me. Suli got up and jumped to follow him. They quickly left the village along the river and stopped at the foot of a low mountain. Taishui River reached here. The large beasts on the mountain had long been killed by hunters. There were only some small animals left, which were not dangerous. Therefore, people in the village did not prohibit children from playing here. The little fatty carefully observed around and found that there was no one else except Suli. Then he jumped into the river, and the water was just above his ankles. Suli looked at him and felt that he was groping for something in the river. She didn't urge him and turned to look at the nameless low mountain. There was no pharmacist in the village. There should be a lot of medicinal materials in the mountain. After the little fatty left, she might as well go up and have a look. Area, look. At this time, the little fatty finally straightened up and fished out a palm-sized ring wrapped in mud from the water. Although it looked shabby, the pattern on it was very simple and beautiful. The little fatty laughed extremely happily. The treasure I mentioned is this. Buzz. At the moment when her eyes touched this thing, Suli's face changed dramatically. She jumped into the river without hesitation and grabbed the ring from the little fatty. Her hands trembled slightly, and she put in the water to wash it. Although the little fatty was a little unhappy, he took out this thing to give to Suli, so he didn't care too much and just watched Suli's movements. The mud slowly faded with the river, revealing the original appearance of the ring. It was like a bracelet engraved with complex patterns, which looked delicate and unique. This thing was exactly the same as the one she had in Yushu's sect, except that the middle was transparent and the most important mirror was missing. Only the frame was left. Reincarnation mirror. Reincarnation mirror was broken. Suli frowned tightly and groped for the feeling, but she could no longer sense the existence of any reincarnation illusion. After the illusion was broken, where did the people who had been trapped in it go? Ling Li, Fang Yuan, Chu Qingning, those relatives and friends who used to be illusory, and her son. Suli suddenly grasped her chest. Her face was faintly pale, and a familiar obsession ignited in her black pupils. She thought she could leave everything and set foot on the road of cultivation. But when the wreckage of Reincarnation Mirror was in front of her, she found she couldn't let it go. Fine. Since that was the case, he might as well put an end to all of this. Suli sighed deeply, and her eyes focused on the ring again. A cold smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and the sarcasm in her eyes grew stronger. Mirror spirit of reincarnation mirror, did you have such a day? Although her soul was about to be broken, the mirror spirit of Su, the mirror spirit it. Arya, what's wrong? The little fatty suddenly came over, and his big round face almost occupied Su Li's sight. He said, "If you're in a daze again, it will be dark." Su Li suddenly woke up and put the bracelet on her hand. Her voice was like sweet spring water, clear and sweet. "Thank you, brother. I like the bracelet very much." The little fatty chuckled and whispered, "Let's go back quickly. Hide the bracelet in your sleeve and don't let anyone find it. If my mother finds out that I brought you out to play again, you'll be in trouble." Su Li nodded obediently. Although it was only the frame of reincarnation mirror, if it was leaked to cultivators, it would definitely cause a disturbance. Of course, she would not let that happen. Seeing Su Li agreed, the little fatty was finally relieved. He talked with Su Li for a long time, and then went home contentedly. Su Li glanced at the slightly dim sky and shook her head slightly. It seemed that she couldn't go to the mountain today. She would find something at the foot of the mountain and go back. It was dark soon after she returned home. Seeing that Huang had not come back, Su Li skillfully made a fire to cook and fried the wild vegetables picked from the mountain into a dish. After doing this, the moon was already high. Huang finally came back with a medicine bag in his hand. Seeing the food on the table, Huang was stunned for a moment. Then he quickly put down the medicine bag and walked to Su Li's room. Su Li, who was studying the ring of reincarnation mirror, heard the movement. She quickly looked up and saw Huang's face. She smiled and showed her teeth. "Grandpa, you are back." Seeing the injury on Su Li's hand that had not healed, Huang's eyes were wet, but he held it back and nodded with a smile. "Yes, come out to eat. I also want to taste Li's cooking." Picking up the chopsticks, Huang picked up the wild vegetables and put them in his mouth to taste. He thought it was bitter and embarrassing, but there was a faint sweetness in the delicious taste. His old eyes brightened slightly. He chewed in big mouthfuls and praised inarticulately, "Li, your cooking is much better than mine. I will have good food in the future." "Ha ha ha." Su Li nodded, and her eyes were bright. "As long as you are happy, Grandpa, I will cook for you every day." Good, good, good. A simple dinner was spent in warmth. After washing the dishes, Huang boiled a large bucket of hot water and poured the bought medicine bag into the water. He told Su Li, "I bought some medicine for you, which is good for your body. You should soak in it for at least 2 hours. Do you understand?" Su Li nodded. After Huang left, she looked at the turquoise bathwater with a serious expression. She smelled at least 5 kinds of medicinal materials that had the effect of healing and removing scars. Now she needed these to recover from her injury. But where did Huang get so much money to buy medicine? These medicinal materials were not cheap. Well, it's no use to think too much. When my cultivation is restored, I will repay him. Su Li pursed her lips slightly, took off her clothes, and sat in the bathtub. She leaned against the edge of the bathtub and quietly moved her pneuma and blood to speed up the recovery of her injury. The medicinal bath water became clear to speed visible to the naked eye. In less than an hour, it became clear water, and the efficacy of the medicine was gone. Most of Su Li's injuries were healed. She was at the age of vigor, so it was much easier to recover from injuries than when she was older. However, because she moved her pneuma and blood to speed up the recovery of her injury, her face became paler. The medicinal materials to replenish pneuma and blood are very precious for warriors. I don't know if there are any more on the short mountain. Sensing the anemia in her body, Su Li's eyes slightly sank. At this moment, the sky full of stars suddenly sprinkled the starlight, which wrapped Su Li in a moment of shock. In an instant, a cool and gentle pneuma completely wrapped her, and a series of bursting sounds came from her thin body. Immediately, Su Li felt that her physical fitness had at least tripled, and the weakness accumulated in 7 years had disappeared. She was no worse than a miss from an ordinary big family. Why does the starlight suddenly come? Suli was surprised and doubtful. Then an idea flashed in her mind. She raised her right hand, and the quaint bracelet on her wrist was emitting a faint fluorescence. If she didn't look carefully, she couldn't see it all. Reincarnation mirror can restore itself. Suli was surprised, but immediately felt it was reasonable. After all, this thing was an ancient treasure. Even if it was broken, it was possible to recover. She looked up at the starry sky with no abnormalities and narrowed her eyes slightly. In this way, even if she didn't practice, her physical body would be constantly tempered by the starlight and become stronger. In her previous life, she suffered a lot in the illusion. In this life, the broken reincarnation mirror became her help. Take it as your compensation for me. Suli smiled coldly, closed her eyes, and tried to lead the power on the bracelet to continue to temper herself. As expected, a part of the starlight poured into her body, staining her newly born internal organs with a layer of silver ash. Little by little, the impurities were discharged from the body along the pores. Gradually, a sense of emptiness spread from Suli's body. After a long time, Suli sensed that the starlight on the bracelet had been consumed by her. She opened her eyes, quickly cleaned the dirt on her body, and got up to dry herself. As soon as she jumped up, Suli felt a unique lightness spread all over her body. It seemed that she could fly out as long as she tiptoed. Of course, Suli knew this was an illusion. She hadn't re-practiced, so no matter how she tempered her physical body, it was impossible to reach the realm of floating in the air. Putting on the linen clothes, Suli glanced at her wrist, which had no scars at all. Her pupils shrank, and she covered her sleeves again, covering the reincarnation bracelet by the way. She thought for a moment, and ran to the well to fetch a bucket of water. Then she saw her face in the water in the moonlight. Although the ugly scars were less, they were still there. Suli breathed a sigh of relief. If even the scars on her face disappeared, she really didn't know what to do. If it attracted more attention, there was a possibility of exposure. Fortunately, things didn't develop in the worst direction. Time flew, and 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. Huang finally found that the scars on Suli's body disappeared, but he didn't feel strange. Instead, he was very happy. He attributed all this to the self-healing ability of children. In this way, he looked forward to the time when the scars on Suli's face would disappear as she grew up. Then he wouldn't have to worry about Suli being lonely after he died. At this time, Suli finally confirmed one thing. The reincarnation mirror had the ability to shield the mysteries of heaven. Otherwise, it was impossible for the mighty figures in the illusion to not have any nature's punishment. Although the broken frame was much weaker than the complete reincarnation mirror, it was enough for her. So, she finally began a practicing the Ghost Clan's most precious practice method named Secret Records of Black Lotus by her. As for the practice of AO sword skills, she postponed it. After all, she had comprehended the first 9 hurdles of AO sword skills in the illusion, and what she lacked was time. Now, she just wanted to know what was so magical about Secret Records of Black Lotus. Chapter 328. In the blink of an eye, another 7 years passed. Suli stayed in Tia village all the time and never went out to see the changes in the outside world. The nimbus in Tia village was barren, and there was no condition for cultivation at all. However, she pushed her cultivation to the peak of the 3rd hurdle of Lianxi realm in just 3 years with the convenience of the body of evil ghost and the reincarnation mirror. The remaining 4 years were limited by the environment, and her cultivation could not be improved. However, her physical strength reached the peak of Zhuji realm because of the frequent quenching of starlight. Such a strange situation could only be caused by Su Li's special physique. If she could enter a suitable environment for cultivation, her cultivation could easily reach Zhuji realm in a short time. However, as early as 1,000 years ago, the blessed places suitable for cultivation had been divided up by the major cultivation sections. Even the places with poor nimbus were occupied by small sections. If she wanted to restore her cultivation, she must join a sect. Holding the literacy book in her hand, Su Li's eyes flickered. It was possible to expose her identity if she contacted the practitioners. But if she didn't contact them, she was likely to be trapped in the third hurdle of Lianqi realm for the rest of her life. The gap between the third hurdle of Lianqi realm and the ninth hurdle of Jinan realm in her previous life was as huge as that between fireflies and the bright moon. In this vast and boundless Qingshui circle, the practitioners in Jinan realm could barely survive. Even in Yushu's sect, there were at least 10 people who could kill her. So, if a casual practitioner in the third hurdle of Lianqi realm walked in the cultivation circle, he had to be careful even when breathing. If he was unlucky, he might be trampled to death by a powerful practitioner. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. She couldn't enter the sect deliberately. She needed an opportunity, and she waited for 4 years. But even so, she remained patient. If she wanted to know what happened in the past, she must step into the cultivation circle. The only difference was whether she was active or passive. If she was passive, it would be more natural and less likely to be exposed. But if there was no opportunity, she could only take the risk to contact the cultivation circle. So, she set a deadline for herself, which was 10 years. Now there were 3 years left. Bang! The wooden ruler hit the table very loudly. The well-dressed teacher looked serious, and his old eyes faintly showed disgust. He scolded Su Li. Su Li changed her mind and slowly raised her head. When her eyes met the teacher's, she was already at a loss. Her expression immediately caused a burst of laughter in the school. The teacher was gloomy. He came over and patted Su Li's desk. "Give me your hand." Su Li sighed in her heart and stretched out her hand obediently. Pa! The wooden ruler hit her palm hard. Although Su Li didn't feel much pain, she still cooperated and showed an aggrieved expression. "No one has ever dared to not listen to my lessons. You are the first. Yesterday, I told you that if you don't listen to my lessons, don't ever think about listening to my lessons again. Now get out of here." Pa! When the last foot fell, Su Li's palms were red. She didn't refute anything and obediently put away the book and walked out of the door. Her experience was so profound that she didn't need to learn much even in a cultivation sect, let alone a mortal school. But Huang didn't know that and insisted on spending the money. So, Su Li could only let him arrange it. As for telling him the truth, Su Li never thought about it. Her identity was too sensitive, and it would only hurt Huang. After the class in the evening, a scholar in blue hurried from another schoolyard. When he saw Su Li standing at the door of the school and hadn't left, his eyes immediately brightened. He walked quickly to Su Li and said with a smile, "Sister Su Li, let's go back to the village together?" Su Li looked up at him and said, "Aren't you afraid of your mother's blame?" The face of the scholar in blue could still see the outline of the little fat boy, but now he was not fat and had a very formal name, Yang Chuanbo. Speaking of which, Yang Chuanbo learned how to be a hunter under the guidance of his father since he was a child. He should have no opportunity to go to the school in the town. But Yang Chuanbo's third uncle became the mayor of the town, and the family's wealth rose greatly. Naturally, he didn't have to run around for survival. Yang Chuanbo's parents thought about it and felt that if he studied, he might be able to take over his third uncle's position in the future. After all, his third uncle was a loner and had no children. The only person he was close to was Yang Chuanbo. As for why Su Li came to school, needless to say, Huang's obsession to make Su Li stand out was stronger than anyone else. Even if the school tuition was very high, he still gritted his teeth and supported it. To Huang's surprise, he worked hard every day, but he didn't get sick. Instead, he became healthier, which really puzzled him. He couldn't find the answer. Over time, he no longer struggled and was happy to go on like this. Yang Chuanbo smiled bitterly and said, "We are the only 2 students in this town, and now you have become beautiful. Even if my mother sees you, she won't blame you." Yang Chuanbo, on the other hand, was still as honest as before. Everything he said was straightforward and without any scheming. Su Li touched the corner of her eyes. Starlight had been refining her body for 7 years, and the scars on her face had long disappeared. Only a small lotus mark in the corner of her eye, which was only the size of a broad bean, was left. It didn't affect her face, but added a little brightness. Huang and the villagers all thought it was a scar left when she was a child. Only she knew in her heart that it must have something to do with Black Lotus Ring. If you're not afraid of being scolded, you can follow me, Su Li said and walked ahead. Yang Chunbua immediately smiled and followed her. As the saying goes, a girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood. He still remembered that when Arya was a child, there were many scars on her face. She was the ugliest of all the little girls in the village. But after only 7 years, after the scars on Su Li's face faded, she became extremely beautiful and lively. She became the most beautiful girl in the village. At the age of 14, it was almost the age to talk about marriage. Now his family was the best in the whole village. Naturally, he wanted to marry Su Li. Moreover, he didn't listen to his mother when he was a child and treated Su Li very well. He must have left a good impression on Su Li, so he had a greater chance to marry her. This caused him and his mother to rejoice. Yang Chunbo was still thinking. He unconsciously walked through the mountain road, and Tia village was already in sight. Su Li stood on the edge of the mountain road and looked down. Smoke had been rising from the roofs of households. Suddenly, she narrowed her eyes and looked to the right. There were 2 smokes, which were completely different from the smoke, coming straight through. Amidst the mist, a young man and a young woman dressed in green and red sword robes rode on the cloud-like magic treasures beneath their feet, flying neither too fast nor too slow. Amidst the lingering clouds and mist, they emitted an otherworldly aura. They were both dragons and phoenixes among men, outstanding and extraordinary. First senior fellow apprentice. The dignified woman in a red sword robe with a soft sword tied to her waist suddenly complained, "Martial Uncle Yuan is clearly using his position to avenge his personal grievances. He asked us to come to such a barren place to find children with immortal latency." What an idiot. The calm face of a young man, who seemed to be 2 years older than the woman, was a little gloomy. He frowned slightly, but said, "Junior sister apprentice, don't talk about the elders. Since Martial Uncle ordered us to do so, he must have his reasons." What bullshit reason? The woman suddenly got angry, and the dignity she struggled to maintain disappeared. She became shrewish and scolded. "Yuan Shu is a villain. Originally, with our cultivation, we should be assigned to a 2nd grade area, or at least a 3rd grade area. But now, first senior fellow apprentice, we have been assigned to a 5th grade area without Nimbus. It's impossible for such a barren place to have children with immortal latency." The young man fell silent, for the junior sister apprentice spoke his mind. Both of them were from a small cultivation sect, Huajian sect. 1,000 years ago, Huajian sect was still an affiliated sect of Yushu sect, the largest sect in Jiuzhou region. It had been prosperous for a time because of the mountain behind it. After the bloody accident of Samsura that shocked the cultivation circle, Yushu sect suffered a great loss, and Huajian sect was not spared. 90% of the talented disciples in the sect died, and the talents withered. There was a shortage of young people. In desperation, the head of the sect had to lower the threshold for accepting disciples and carry out a great reform. In the past, there was an iron rule for accepting disciples in the cultivation sections. Talent was the most important, and temperament was the second. Only those with a complete spiritual root were qualified to be trained by the sect and step into the path of cultivation. After the reform, the disciples of Huajian sect were no longer limited to those with spiritual roots. As long as they had a little bit of affinity with cultivation, they would be accepted and trained. This kind of disciples were also called children with immortal latency. Such behavior naturally made the disciples with spiritual root, who were originally superior, dissatisfied. Even the elders of the sect felt that it was absurd and a joke. Huajian sect was in chaos for hundreds of years. It was not until a genius child with immortal latency was born that the method of recruiting children with immortal latency was finally recognized. Even if a lot of cultivation resources were wasted, it was not a loss if 1 in 1,000 children with immortal latency could cultivate to Zhuji realm. What's more, That genius was far beyond Juji realm. Now 1,000 years had passed. Although Huajian sect was still a weak sect, it was much stronger than in the past. The young man dispelled these distracting thoughts and stopped thinking about these trivial things. Every 10 years, the sect would send 50 inherited disciples to travel for a year to recruit disciples. Each disciple would bring back no less than 2 children with immortal latency, and the more the better. This year, his brother and sister were also among them. Unfortunately, Uncle Master Yuan was in the way. It was really difficult for the 2 of them to bring back 4 children with celestial latency within a year. However, if they returned empty-handed, their cultivation resources would definitely be reduced. Therefore, when they left the sect, Junior Sister was already calculating in her heart that if she really couldn't find a suitable candidate, then she would just bring back 4 boys that she found pleasing to the eye. In any case, immortal fate was just a saying. Whether they were fated or not, it all depended on the 2 of them. Originally, he was not willing to deceive the master and the senior masters, but the 1-year period was coming. The young man's eyes darkened slightly. Yuan Shu, it's your fault. Don't blame me. Chapter 329. Senior Fellow Apprentice, there is a village here. Let's go down and have a look. The junior sister apprentice in red saw the smoke of Tia village and asked. The young man nodded slightly. Suddenly, he felt someone was peeping at him and immediately turned his head to look at the direction of the gaze. It turned out that 2 teenagers happened to see the cloud. The young man breathed a sigh of relief and didn't care anymore. Senior Fellow Apprentice, what's wrong with you? The young man shook his head and landed in the middle of Tia village. This scene was immediately seen by many villagers of Tia village. For a time, the village was shocked, and a large group of people ran to the direction where the cloud landed. Sister Su Li, look! The cloud fell from the sky. Yang Chunbua, who also saw this change, exclaimed, "Let's go and have a look." Then he quickened his pace. Su Li narrowed her eyes and followed him. When they walked to the entrance of the village, they happened to meet a beautifully dressed girl who had just come out of the village head's home. When she saw Yang Chunbua, her beautiful eyes suddenly brightened. Then she saw Su Li beside Yang Chunbua. A trace of jealousy flashed on her delicate face, but she quickly recovered and greeted them in a crisp voice. "Brother Chunbua." Yang Chunbua turned his head and saw the girl. He couldn't help but smile and called Huan Huan. Hearing Yang Chunbua's intimate address, Liu Huan was slightly happy and nodded repeatedly. "I saw Grandpa and Aunt go there. Let's go." Then, she didn't wait for Yang Chunbua to continue to say anything. She stepped forward to occupy Su Li's position and pushed his back to walk away. Feeling the warm and soft little hand behind him, Yang Chunbua couldn't help walking and felt uncomfortable. He hurriedly said, "Men and women shouldn't touch each other. Huan Huan, you have grown up. This is not appropriate." Liu Huan rolled her eyes and pouted. "What's inappropriate? Brother Chunbua, let's go. If we are late, we won't be able to see anything." Yang Chunbua had no choice but to sigh secretly and follow Liu Huan's intention. The old village head was very prestigious in the town. He didn't want to offend the Li family and cause his uncle to look down on him. Seeing that Yang Chunbua finally obeyed, Liu Huan's face was a little proud. Then, she didn't forget to show off to Su Li, who followed behind, and said silently, "You can never compete with me." Seeing this, Su Li couldn't help but feel speechless. She had lived for more than 1,000 years, and her temperament had long been tempered like iron and stone. There was no way she would stoop to the level of a 13-year-old Liu Huan. In this village, the only one who had some karma with her was Huang. She raised her head and looked over Li and Yang, falling on the place, surrounded by a group of Tia villagers not far away. There were 2 auras there, brilliant like lights in the dark night. Perhaps it was because this place was remote and it was impossible to meet people of the same Tao, or perhaps it was to intimidate mortals, but the 2 of them did not restrain their auras at all. Early stage foundation establishment, and 2 of them. Su Li was slightly shocked, and a touch of caution appeared at the bottom of her eyes, but she was not nervous. With such a low cultivation, it was impossible for him to come for her. Even so, with her recovered strength, she could kill the two of them with one move. Liu Huan saw that Su Li was not angry at all, but completely ignored her. She was very upset, but in front of Yang Chuanbua, she would not show her unruly side. She could only hold back her anger and wait to settle accounts later. At this moment, by the Taishui River, a group of villagers saw the two figures of a young man and a young woman after the clouds dispersed. They were all stunned, and then they began to point and whisper. The woman, who was treated like this for the first time in front of mortals, suddenly frowned and was angry. She was about to scold and frighten them, but was stopped by the young man, who shook his head and said, "It seems that this is a very rare barbarian land. Don't bother with them." The woman suddenly realized that the so-called barbarian land was the land of mortals who still didn't know what cultivation was. This place was really not ordinary and remote. "Barbarian, who are you scolding, you little boy?" The young man did not transmit the sound, but his words were certainly heard by the villagers, which immediately aroused the anger of a group of people, and they were about to step forward to teach the young man a lesson. The young man frowned slightly. Trouble. Although he acted calmly and reasonably, a cultivator was not a kind person, and killing one or two mortals was no burden for him. But at this moment, someone shouted, "The old village head is here." The young man's movement paused slightly, and then he saw a white-haired old man on crutches trembling in front of him, saluting and saying, "You two look extraordinary, so you must be of noble origin. May I ask why you come to my Tia village?" The woman in red snorted coldly and said in a sweet voice, "We are inherited disciples of Huajian sect, an immortal cultivation sect." Immortal cultivation sect? Huajian sect? The old village head was a loss. The woman's words were like playing the lute to a cow. Su Li, who was standing in the crowd, blinked her eyes slightly. She had some impression of this sect. She didn't know if the current head of Huajian sect was still the immortal Hua, Yin, who was obsessed with flowers and started cultivation with flowers. What immortal cultivation? Are there really immortals in this world? Don't tell me these two are. While people were whispering, they thought of the way the two people came, and their faces changed with fear. If they were really immortals, didn't they just offend immortals? Today was the day off at the dock. Huang, who had slept all day, came sleepily. Seeing a large group of people around the river, he couldn't help but go forward curiously. When he saw the indifferent young man and woman surrounded in the middle, his face suddenly changed. He squeezed to the innermost area, plopped down on his knees, and said, "Welcome, Huang Dashin. The mortals in the village have little knowledge and don't know your noble identity. Please be generous and don't stoop to our level." The old village head's face changed slightly. Huang. He suddenly remembered that Huang once said those crazy words. Could it be true? The young man looked a little relaxed and said lightly, "It seems that you have some knowledge, but your companions don't seem to believe it." Well, as he said, he touched the ring in his hand, and a white light flashed instantly. Then people were surprised to find that there was a sword in the young man's hand. Only Huang panicked when he saw it. He wanted to say something, but it was obviously too late. The young man waved the sword lightly, and the arm of the man who scolded the most fiercely just now fell off. The blood splashed on the face of the farmer woman closest to him. Ah! The man stared blankly at his arm, which had fallen to the ground with a thud. A sharp pain suddenly assaulted him, causing him to scream out in pain. The surprise on everyone's face stopped abruptly and was replaced by fear and panic. "Master! Master, how are you?" Looking at the villagers in chaos, the woman in red became more and more impatient. When she was about to kill the man to warn the others, Huang suddenly shivered and shouted, "Well done. Don't be angry, immortals. If you have any orders, we will go through fire and water for you without any hesitation." Reminded by Huang, the crowd finally came to their senses and realized what kind of existence they were facing. They all shut their mouths and dared not speak. Even the man whose arm had been chopped off had a pale face and was trying hard not to make a sound. The old village head also came over, swallowed his saliva, and said with fear in his eyes, "Huang is right. Our Tia village is willing to serve you." The young man looked at Huang with interest and said without concealment, "You have good eyesight. Unfortunately, you are old, or I would like to take you up the mountain to be a handyman supervisor." Huang bowed his head and said repeatedly, "Thank you for your kindness. Okay, eldest senior fellow apprentice, it's important to get down to business." The woman in red reminded him, and her finger moved from the ring. Huang was finally relieved when he saw it. The young man stopped talking and looked at the old village head. "It is a blessing for your Tia village that we come here today. Our Huajian sect opens the gate every 10 years to accept new disciples. Hurry up and find all the children under the age of 16 in the village. My junior sister apprentice, and I will pick 2 each and send them to the sect to seek immortality and Taoism." The old village head was stunned when he heard it. "Do you mean that the children in their village will become immortals like you in the future?" The woman smiled proudly and interrupted, "Of course. My senior fellow apprentice is the 3rd inherited disciple. How can he lie? Hurry up." As soon as the words came out, all the people who had children at home showed great joy on their faces. Without the old village head's order, they all went home to call their children. Even the man whose arm was cut off ran quickly. This was a chance to become an immortal, and no mortal didn't want to become an immortal. The woman showed a little pride as a cultivator on her face, but the young man who was used to this scene didn't change his expression. His eyes fell on the children who stayed here with a trace of yearning. Almost at a glance, the young man saw Su Li. Although she had the black lotus ring to cover the traces of cultivation, her appearance after cultivation was naturally much more flexible than that of ordinary mortals. Coupled with the lotus-shaped mark at the corner of her eyebrows, she was quite outstanding among the many peasant children. Lotus birthmark? This woman is destined to be in Huajian sect. I have an explanation even in front of senior uncle. Thinking of this, the young man showed a trace of gentleness on his face. He waved to Su Li and said slowly, "You come to me." Huang followed the gaze and was not surprised to see Su Li, but he inevitably felt a trace of bitterness in his heart. If Su Li entered the sect, he was afraid that he would never have a chance to see her again in this life. Su Li was slightly vigilant, but she looked innocent and ignorant on the surface. She walked to the young man obediently. When the young man saw the book bag on her back, his eyes became more gentle and he smiled. "It's better that you can read. It's easier to teach. What's your name? Whose child are you?" In the face of the young man's question, Su Li did not answer, but turned her head and looked at Huang. Chapter 330. Although Su Li's movement seemed quite weak, it was disguised by her age. In the eyes of the young man, it was ignorant of the world, and he didn't blame her. He followed Su Li's gaze and looked at Huang. Then he looked more relaxed. "Is she your granddaughter?" Cold sweat appeared on Huang's forehead. He bowed his head and said respectfully, "Immortal." Arya was from the Su family in the east of the village. After her father died, she was lonely, so I took her in as a companion. It has been 7 years now. When the young man heard this, he was more interested. In this way, after Huang died, Su Li would have no worries in the secular world and would not be involved in the mortal world. She would have an excellent immortal fate. It would be no trouble for him to send her to the sect. "Well, I already know that your granddaughter is indeed destined to be an immortal. I will take her back to the sect and train her carefully as one of my selected children with immortal fate." When the young man said this, he frowned. He didn't want to ask Su Li's name for the second time. Huang gritted his teeth and said, "Immortal, please forgive me." At that time, Arya didn't have a formal name. I didn't know much, so I boldly used the name of a big shot to change her fate. Now I can't say this name in front of you. "Oh." The young man raised his eyebrows, and the woman in red couldn't help but laugh at Su Li, who was cautious. "A big shot? Old guy, the big shot in your eyes may be less than an ant in our eyes." Huang smiled bitterly, opened his mouth, and hesitated. Arya's name is... Seeing that he was still hesitating, the woman in red immediately became impatient. Li Yuehuan, who was standing next to Yang Chumbua, seemed to realize that this was a good opportunity to stop Su Li from seeking immortality. She immediately shouted, "Su Li!" Her name is Su Li, which means Lin Li. As soon as the words came out, the young man and the woman in red changed their faces. This name wasn't the one in Yushu's sect. Senior brother, we can't bring him back to the sect. The woman in red raised her eyebrows and immediately opened her mouth to stop him. Don't forget the relationship between the sect leader and Su and that person. If she finds out that a mortal dares to use this name and is brought into the sect to cultivate, she will definitely be furious. Perhaps even we will be implicated. After the red-clothed woman finished speaking, her face suddenly became a lot uglier. She just said those words. If others were to know that she called that person an ant, wouldn't that mean? Thinking of this, the woman in red lifted her head and her gaze shot towards Li Yuehuan like lightning. Li Yuehuan had never experienced such a sharp gaze before. She was so frightened that her face turned pale. Her body softened and she leaned against Yang Chunbu's chest, but she was secretly delighted. She didn't expect that saying Su Li's name would really make her lose the chance to become an immortal. In this way, wouldn't his chances be even greater? Yang Chunbu was at a loss of what to do. He looked at the old village head for help, but the old village head seemed not to see it. He stood aside like an old man and dared not to cross the line. The young man stood aside and frowned. Obviously, he was hesitant because of what his junior sister apprentice said. At this time, the villagers of Tia village arrived with their children. The young man was slightly refreshed. He temporarily put Su Li's matter aside and carefully selected the children. The woman in red also temporarily withdrew her gaze and selected with her senior fellow apprentice. The test of spiritual root could only be carried out in the sect. For the two of them who went out to recruit disciples for the sect, it seemed that they could only choose from the appearance. Whoever was pleasing to the eye would get the opportunity to soar to the sky. Su Li quietly watched the two of them exclude the ordinary-looking children. Looking at the resentment and disappointment on the faces of the children's parents, a ripple appeared in her heart. There was no fairness in the world. People were born unequal. Some people were born as the sons of the sect leader with noble status and endless practice resources, while some people were born in poor families. They might not have a good end, even if they work hard all their lives. So some people said that they should accept their fate. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. Over the years, she intermittently learned what happened 1,000 years ago from Huang. Although there were many vague parts, she also speculated a lot of things. The broken mirror must have something to do with the old beggar. The number of practitioners who died because of the broken mirror was more than 100,000, which was far more than the number of talents from the Jiuzhou region who entered that year. She remembered that there were no more than 1,000 sect geniuses who entered the reincarnation mirror at the same time as her. But the number she heard now was 100 times larger. Other regions also participated, even the entire Qingshui circle. Su Li's eyes flashed with light. This conclusion was not difficult to guess, because no matter Ling Li, Feng Yuan, or even Chu Qingning, they were not from the Jiuzhou region. Otherwise, it was impossible for her not to have any impression. For the entire Qingshui circle, her death seemed insignificant, and even Yushu's sect was just a pawn. Opening the reincarnation mirror and then dying, that was her fate. All kinds of complex thoughts came to her mind. Suddenly, Su Li had another idea. As soon as this idea appeared, it lingered in her heart like a maggot attached to the bone and could not be dispersed. Although the reincarnation mirror was an ancient treasure of heaven and earth, she was the only one who has inherited the secret method to open it after all. Even the old beggar and others once said that she was half the owner of the reincarnation mirror. If she hadn't opened the reincarnation mirror for Yushu's sect, she might have been a powerful person in the world now. Even with the help of the reincarnation mirror, she might have become one of the giants with the right to speak in Qingshui circle. But in the end, she still couldn't let go of her master and the sect she had stayed in for 900 years. So, she resolutely opened the door of the reincarnation mirror with her body as the foundation. One wrong step, and the whole game was lost. She took a step, which was like sending a plate of fish to a group of robbers. From then on, she became the fish on the chopping board, which was eroded by all forces in Qing Shui's circle. They sent countless pawns to plunder everything that should belong to her. Would Ling Li and Fang Yuan also be the pawns deliberately arranged by those chess masters? Su Li's hands hidden in her sleeves slowly clenched. Her lips were pale, and her eyes were dim. Finally, she suddenly relaxed. She didn't want to think about the answer to the question. When she recultivated to a certain realm, all the truth would be revealed naturally. By then, maybe she would be ready to accept cruelty. When she came to herself for a moment, the two people of Huajian's sect finally looked at the qualified children of dozens of families in Tia village. Finally, the young man chose Yang Chunbua, who had read books, and the other candidate was hesitant. The woman in red chose two boys who looked quite smart, and didn't even look at Li Yuehuan, who was full of longing. She didn't like to take jealous boys with her. The young man glanced at Su Li, who bowed her head and didn't know what she was thinking. He moved his eyes away and finally fell on Li Yuehuan. The latter immediately tensed up and nervously tidied the broken hair around her ears. There was a trace of fear in her panic. Her appearance was really pitiful, which made other teenagers in the village swallow their saliva secretly. However, the young man's face turned cold. He had climbed all the way from an outer court disciple to the position of a true inheriting disciple. And along the way, there had been countless female cultivators who wanted to climb into his bed. Li Yuehuan's expression was exactly the same as those cheap women, and just looking at her made him want to vomit. The young man sighed secretly and finally looked back to Su Li. If he hadn't met Su Li, he wouldn't have had such a high requirement for selecting the child with immortal latency. But it was like tasting delicious food. Once the most delicious food was placed in the front, other food would become bland and tasteless. Well, it's a little troublesome, and it may not even be troublesome, the young man pondered in his heart, and finally waved to Su Li and said, "Come here and leave with me." Su Li was slightly stunned. She didn't expect that the young man still chose her after hearing her name. Although she felt strange in her heart, she still walked to the young man obediently and bowed her head in silence. "Senior fellow apprentice." The woman in red suddenly became anxious, but before she spoke, she was interrupted by the young man, who waved his hand and said, "It's okay. I know what to do." Then he turned his head and asked, "Su Li, your name is troublesome, so I will give you a new name. Would you like to?" Su Li suddenly understood. It turned out that this was his idea. Huang's eyes brightened when he heard the words, and his intuition told him that this method was very good. But seeing that Su Li didn't respond, he suddenly became anxious and urged in a low voice, "Li, agree." Although he might never see Su Li again in this life after she entered the sect, as a grandfather who didn't want his granddaughter to have a better future, Su Li heard the concern and eagerness in Huang's words, and her heart was slightly warmed. She raised her head and nodded. "Immortal, please give me a name." In such a situation, there was no room for her to refuse. If she really refused, it was likely that she would not be able to enter the sect, and if the young man was a little narrow-minded, he might kill her at will. At that time, she would have to show her real cultivation to resist. Even if she was killed, it would definitely attract the attention of Huajian's sect, and then enter the sight of Yushu's sect, and even more people. She couldn't bear such consequences now. Of course, the young man didn't know that Su Li had thought so much in just a few breaths, and he didn't know that he was on the verge of death. He saw Su Li's well-behaved appearance and the pure pneuma she exuded, which made him feel very comfortable. A faint smile inadvertently appeared on the corner of his mouth. "That's good. Since you are willing, I must give you a good name. On the way back to the sect, I will think about it and tell you. If you succeed in your cultivation in the future, it is okay to change back to the original name." "Thank you, Immortal." Su Li saluted respectfully, but she knew that the second half of the young man's words was completely polite. If she changed her name without the young man's cultivation, it would inevitably cause the young man's displeasure. Chapter 331. Stimulated by the two, The cloud flew extremely fast. Half a day passed in the blink of an eye. Except for Su Li, the fear and reluctance of Yang Chuanbua and others faded away, leaving only excitement and novelty. However, with the deterrence of the young man, they didn't dare to speak carelessly. Su Li glanced at the young man who was concentrating on flying, and her expression was indifferent. Before leaving, Huang took her hand and said a lot of things to her. Girl, you have to remember that the cultivation sect is not a good place. When I was in Yushu sect, I saw many handyman disciples die violently, and even the official disciples of Weinman branch live carefully for fear of losing their lives. After entering the sect, remember to be careful in everything and don't act rashly to offend others. You are a sensible girl, alas. It could be seen that Huang was very worried about her, and there were many things he didn't tell her, but there was no time for him to nag. Su Li didn't promise Huang. Although Gunhuajian's sect was within her control, everything in the world was variable. Even if she was reborn in the illusion, she couldn't protect herself, let alone now. After a while, Su Li raised her head and looked at the mountain not far below the cloud like Yang Chunbua and others. There, she could vaguely see a sense of familiarity. The mountain gate of Huajian sect should be here. Sure enough, soon after, the young man and the woman controlled the magic weapons to descend at the same time. After passing through a cloud of miasma, a mountain surrounded by clouds and mist came into view, which was completely different from the frozen world outside. The mountain peaks were like spring all year round, with birds singing and fragrant flowers, like a paradise isolated from the world. Occasionally, white cranes could be seen flying up from the mountain peaks in a graceful posture, like a fairyland. Several children widened their eyes and exclaimed in surprise, "What a beautiful place! Is this the place where immortals live?" Yang Chunbua opened his mouth wide. At a young age, he never thought that there would be such beautiful mountains and rivers in the world. Su Li also pretended to be inexperienced on the surface, but she was secretly awestruck. When she passed through the miasma just now, she clearly felt that the second layer of the mountain-guarding matrix of Huajian sect was opened. At that time, she was the holy girl of Yushu sect, relying not only on her strong cultivation and combat capability, but also on the realm of tactical matrix master. Huayan wanted to establish her own sect. As her best friend, she gave her the triple star-stacked mountain-guarding matrix as a congratulatory gift. As its name suggested, the matrix was divided into 3 layers. The first layer only activated the illusory array and the low-level defensive array, which could be maintained by consuming the lowest grade of low-grade spirit stones. The second layer activated the illusory array, defensive array, and a part of the killing array at the same time, which required the consumption of low-grade spirit stones. It could only be activated when the sect was in danger. As for the third layer, it needed precious upper-grade spiritual stones to increase the power of the tactical matrix. Huajian sect was a small sect. Not to mention upper-grade spiritual stones, even the reserves of middle-grade spiritual stones were not enough. If the third layer of the tactical matrix was really opened, Huajian sect would not be far from being destroyed. Now, Huajian sect looked very peaceful, and they even had the leisure to go out to look for new disciples. Why would they open the second tactical matrix? Su Li's heart was full of doubts, but this question was obviously not what she could ask. She could only put it in her heart and explore it later. Not long after, the young man and the woman led Su Li and others to an open space on the top of the mountain. Someone on the mountain saw them and hurried over immediately. Taking advantage of this time, the young man explained, "There are 4 peaks in Huajian sect. Among them, Baiwa Peak is the residence of the headmaster, and there are not many disciples there. Among the other 3 peaks, Fujin Peak and Danxia Peak, are for the disciples of Naiman Branch. All the disciples of Naiman Branch stay in Qinghua Peak. This is Qinghua Peak." Then he looked at Su Li and said, "From now on, your name will be Su Yu." Su Li was slightly stunned. After thinking of the figure in the reincarnation mirror, she nodded. She didn't dislike this name. The real Su Yu should also live well in Qing Shui's circle. If there was a chance in the future, She could see her. Hearing the young man's words, the woman smiled slightly and thought to herself, "Romantic, Hua. She, senior fellow apprentice Han Feng has two maids named Hua and Shui respectively. That's probably how the word you came about. It's really casual." While they were talking, two middle-aged men in cyan standard robes had arrived quickly. Under the astonished gaze of Yang Chunbua and others, they respectfully saluted to the young man and the woman. "Greetings, Senior Uncle Han and Senior Uncle Ruan." Han Feng nodded slightly and glanced at the surprised children, but didn't explain. He told the middle-aged man in cyan, "Take them to the testing stone, and I will come later." Then, Han Feng and the woman, surnamed Ruan, floated away under the envious gaze of the middle-aged man in cyan. After a long time, the middle-aged man in cyan, who looked older, withdrew his gaze and looked indifferent again. He said, "Come with me. You may have many questions in your mind, but it doesn't matter. As long as you stay in the sect for a while, you will understand everything. Now, come with me." Hearing this, Yang Chunbua and others didn't dare to act rashly and hurriedly followed him. Suli deliberately fell behind and walked at the end. Walking to a spacious square on the mountainside, the two middle-aged men in cyan stopped. Yang Chunbua and others were surprised to find that there were no less than 100 children in addition to them at this moment. Their ages ranged from 10 to 16 years old. Many of them were very well dressed, and it was obvious that they were of noble birth. After the middle-aged man in cyan sent them here, he left. Without the discipline of adults, the children immediately chatted in groups of 3 or 4. "Su, Sister Suyu, do you know what the spirit testing stone is?" Yang Chunbua was so shocked that he broke into a cold sweat and almost spilled the beans. The other two boys' faces were pale. They were so scared that they didn't even dare to speak. Such a big scene had already exceeded the scope of what they could accept. Suli shook her head and didn't speak. Yang Chunbua just thought that she was also nervous, so he could only helplessly wait aside. Suli looked at the black and lustrous square stone tablet in the square, which was as tall as a person. This was the testing stone, a low-level magic treasure, specially used to test the spiritual root. At most, it could test the middle-grade spiritual root. The mountain gate occupied by Huajian sect was not full of nimbus. It would be lucky if there could be a disciple with a complete spiritual root in the surrounding area. Probably, they never thought that they could test the middle-grade spiritual root. As for the principle of the testing stone, it was very simple. As long as there was spiritual power in the body to resonate with it, it could distinguish the strength of the spiritual root according to the degree of resonance. There was no nimbus in the body of mortals, so they could only rely on the spiritual root to resonate. This was also the simplest and fastest way for many sects to select disciples from the secular world. Thinking of this, Su Li's eyes flickered slightly. She had reached the third hurdle of Lianxi realm now, and there was a spiritual power whirlpool in her body. As long as she wanted, she could even imitate the resonance of the super-grade spiritual root. What's more, she was a body of evil ghost, and even natural law would be afraid of her talent. The low-level method of testing the spiritual root was not suitable for her at all. Now, the only thing that made her feel embarrassed was to what degree of spiritual root to expose. It was true that she could make herself one of the inconspicuous handymen of Huajian sect without triggering the testing stone at all. But if she wanted to recover as soon as possible, she must need practicing resources. Only by becoming an official disciple could she have the opportunity to get practicing resources. Moreover, handyman disciples had no human rights in the sect, and no one would care if they were killed at will. Even if she wanted to recultivate quietly, it would be very difficult. Suddenly, there was a commotion among the children. Suli looked in the direction of the loudest voice. It turned out that there were two more children, a boy and a girl, who were dressed in well-tailored golden clothes. They behaved with nobility, as if they were princes and princesses from the royal family, which made all the other children present feel ashamed. The boy in golden clothes looked proud and glanced at the audience. There was a sneer on his childish and fair face. He was different from these lowly and poor people, but his father asked him to test the spiritual root in the same place with this group of garbage. It was disgusting. All right, I'll see you off here. Don't let me down. The woman who brought her tongue said indifferently, and the boy in golden clothes restrained his arrogance and saluted. Thank you, First Senior Sister Apprentice. First Senior Sister Apprentice? Hearing this title, the woman slightly twitched the corner of her mouth. She didn't say anything and turn away. Shortly after she left, many children suddenly surrounded the boy in golden clothes. Forming cliques in order to survive was something that started from the moment they entered the sect. Shall we go there too? In the small group of Tia village, one of the two boys couldn't help but ask. Suli vaguely remembered that his name was Chunhu. The other boy, Wang Xiai, immediately looked at Yang Chunbua. Yang Chunbua hesitated and glanced at Su Li, who was unmoved. In the end, he sighed and didn't take any action. If you don't go, I will. Chunhu looked at the golden-robed boy, and yearning flashed in his eyes. He then tugged at Wang Xiai, who was beside him. Wang Xiai looked like he was in a difficult position, but when he saw more and more people around the golden-robed boy, he couldn't help but leave with Chunhu. Area, Yang Chunbua was slightly anxious, but because he couldn't let go of Su Li, he didn't follow them. Su Li sighed secretly. For the sake of the ring of reincarnation mirror, she said, wait a little longer. It's too early to choose now. Hearing Su Li's words, Yang Chunbua suddenly froze and immediately looked at Su Li with confusion and doubt. Sister Area seemed to be a little different, but he had too little knowledge. Except for the word different, he couldn't say a specific word to describe it. He just felt that he should listen to Su Li. At this moment, a loud shout suddenly burst over the field like a thunder. What are you doing? A group of children crowded together were immediately frightened and in a mess. Many children were trampled and injured. Chapter 332. When the green-robed stewards heard this, their expressions changed. Without saying a word, they rushed down to save several severely injured children who were about to be trampled to death. Among them was Chunhu. At this moment, his face was covered in blood and he was crying loudly. Even if he could survive, his face would be disfigured. Wang Xiai was also slightly injured, but he was much better than Chunhu. Yang Chunbua looked at this scene with lingering fear. Fortunately, he listened to Su Li and didn't go over. Otherwise, he would probably end up like Chunhu. Thinking of this, he subconsciously glanced at Su Li beside him, but found that the latter saw such a bloody scene without any change of expression on her face. Yang Chunbua became more and more confused. Was this still the sister, Su Li he knew before, who didn't even dare to kill a chicken? Right at this moment, the black-robed old man finally descended from the sky. With a sweep of his sharp gaze, all the children were immediately intimidated, and in an instant, there was absolute silence. The elder coughed slightly and said loudly, "Little kids, I am the elder of Wyman Branch. I am responsible for testing your spiritual roots. Now come over and line up for the test one by one. Inka, watch carefully. If anyone dares to make a ruckus, kick him out of the sect." Yes. The middle-aged man in cyan clothes who had brought Su Li and others to the open space stepped forward and responded. Then he arranged the line in an orderly manner with many stewards behind him. Yang Chunbua and Su Li lined up in the middle. Su Li looked around the line and saw at a glance that the boy in gold clothes was at the front of the line. But at this moment, the boy in gold clothes was a little disheveled and looked quite embarrassed. He was almost injured in the chaos just now. On the contrary, the girl in gold clothes was still the same. Her eyes were timid, and she didn't have the arrogance of the boy in gold clothes. The black-clothed elder walked to the front of the stone tablet and pressed his palm on the stone surface. The whole stone surface suddenly lit up slightly and then dimmed down. Seeing this, he nodded and turned back indifferently. "The first one, come to my side." The boy in gold clothes looked a little respectful, but not nervous. The royal family he was born in had some connection with cultivation, so it was not difficult to find a low-grade spiritual stone for testing in advance. Place your hand on the stone tablet, empty your mind, and feel it with all your heart. Under the guidance of the black-robed elder, the golden-robed boy gradually relaxed. At the same time, the stone's surface glowed with a golden luster. Although it was very dim and could not be seen without careful observation, the black-robed elder's face quickly softened. 60% gold spirit root. Not bad. It's enough to become an inner disciple of our sect. What's your name? The golden-robed boy was delighted when he heard the words. He quickly bowed and said respectfully, "Elder, my name is Jean Wei." The old man in black nodded and said with a faint smile, "There is a good seedling in this generation of the Jinsheng royal family." Jean Wei heard the praise from the elder of the Immortal Gate, and he became complacent for a moment. The arrogance that he had restrained just now appeared again. He stood beside the steward who passed the test and looked at the children who were still queuing up. His nose was almost up to the sky. The second one was Jean Wei's sister, Jeaning. Obviously, her status in the royal family was not very high, and she had not tested her spiritual root in advance. Her little face looked quite perturbed. She could come with Jean Wei this time, because Jean Wei liked her very much. According to the black-robed elder's words, a layer of golden light immediately lit up when she put her tender palm on it. The brightness was even higher than that of Jean Wei. 80% gold spirit root, good. The black-robed elder's eyes brightened, and he said good 3 times in a row. He looked at Jeaning as if he had found a treasure and said, "Little girl, what's your name?" His tone was obviously softer than when he talked to Jean Wei before. My name is Jeaning," Jeaning said timidly, but her big bright eyes could not hide her joy. She was not a fool, although she did not understand what 80% gold spirit root meant. One thing was certain, that her future in Huajian sect was bound to be more brilliant than that of her royal brother. "Jeaning, good name. Inger, stay by my side," the black-robed elder gently told her, and then turned to a steward and ordered, "Inform the mount heads quickly." The black-robed elder calculated in his heart. An 80% gold spirit root was enough to cause the inner elders to fight for it. Qinghua Mount was called Wyman Mount because there were too few geniuses in the younger generation. Decades ago, Wyman Mount belonged to Li Guang's Fujian Mount. But unexpectedly, the old guy was so lucky that he received a child with immortal latency with acquired body of sword. Now the disciple had entered Yushu sect and was not in Huajian sect. But as long as the person was still alive, Fujian Mount would not fall into Wyman Mount. This experience naturally made the mount heads of Huajian sect begin to pay attention to the children with immortal latency. As long as there was a good seedling among the children, it would inevitably cause a fierce competition. At the same time as the black-robed elder gave the order, several disciples of Wyman branch who were watching from the periphery also quietly retreated, and it seemed that they left for the other 2 mount gates. "Okay, continue the test." The black-robed elder calmed down and finally remembered that the spirit test had just begun, so he began to restore the order. However, elite disciples like Jinsheng royal family were rare after all. Then dozens of children's palms pressed on the testing stone, but there was no reaction at all. Without the spiritual root, there were only 2 ways out. One was to continue to stay in Wyman Mount as a handyman disciple to seek a glimmer of immortal latency. The other was to go down the mountain and go home to be an honest mortal. But if they didn't know, it would be fine. These children had come to Huajian sect, a land of immortals, and saw the flying immortals. How could they be willing to go back to the original place and continue to live their lives facing the yellow soil? Therefore, all the children who had not been tested with the spiritual root chose to start as a handyman disciple on Qinghua Mount, just like Huang in the past. They still had a glimmer of luck in their hearts. The black-robed elder was disappointed again and again, and soon gave up the idea of testing in person. He asked the steward to take over, and he sat aside with Jeaning to get closer to them. Jean Wei, who stood alone on the side, was very embarrassed. Who could have thought that his sister, whom he brought as a concubine casually, had a better talent than him? When he thought that he could not have Jeaning as his own in the future, and it was very likely that he would have to compete with others for Jin Ying's heart. He felt sick in his heart. In the blink of an eye, the test team had gone halfway. Su Li suddenly raised her head to look at the sky, and then quickly lowered her head. No one saw this scene except Yang Chuanbua, who had been paying attention to her. He looked up at the blue sky and was about to ask Su Li what she was looking at. Suddenly, whoosh, whoosh, gusts of violent wind blew from the sky, and the team of children suddenly swayed. Yang Chuanbua was the first to bear the brunt of the wind. He was blown to tears and couldn't open his eyes. After the wind dissipated, 3 figures suddenly appeared in the field. When the black-robed elder saw them, he complained in his heart. Why did these 3 come together? While thinking, he quickly stepped forward and saluted Senior Fellow Apprentice Li, Senior Sister Apprentice Wang, Mount Head. The middle-aged Taoist, who stood on the leftmost and was called Mount Head by the elder, snorted when he heard the words. Only when he saw the little girl, Jin Ying, who was held by him, did he look better. He turned to the other 2 and said, Junior Fellow Apprentices and Junior Sister Apprentices, it's not easy for Qinghua Mount to have such an outstanding talent. Don't compete with me, okay? The middle-aged Taoist was Yuan Shu, the Mount Head of Qinghua Mount. Among the other 2, the thin one in a black robe and carrying a long sword was Han Feng's master, the Mount Head of Fujin Feng, who discovered the genius with acquired body of sword. Li Guang, and the other female practitioner in a light black dress was Wang Yu, the Mount Head of Danxia Mount. Wang Yu looked at Jin Ying, who was as beautiful as a porcelain doll, with a smile and retorted, Senior Fellow Apprentice, you are wrong. Jin Ying is a girl, and it's a little inconvenient for her to follow you. Besides, there are few female disciples on Qinghua Mount. If she doesn't come to Danxia Mount, she will be ruined by you. If you really want this girl, you'd better take her back. I will teach her personally and cultivate her to be a talent. Yuan Shu scolded her for being cunning in his heart, but he still smiled and shook his head. Impossible. There are many female disciples on Qinghua Mount, and male disciples can also thrive. Junior Sister Apprentice, don't talk about the difference between men and women. At worst, I will throw away my dignity and send her to the main peak. The smile on Wang Yu's face immediately disappeared. This old fox really refused to suffer losses, but she was not so easily persuaded. She turned to look at Jin Ying, who looked innocent. I think it's up to this girl to decide which peak to go to. What do you think, Senior Fellow Apprentice? Yuan Shu was slightly stunned and didn't know what Wang Yu was planning. But when he thought that his junior fellow apprentice and Jin Ying had been intimate for a long time, he was about to agree. At this moment, the steward suddenly exclaimed. The spiritual testing stone suddenly emitted a very strong blue light, which was even more intense than Jin Ying's. Everyone's attention was attracted, and then their eyes fell on Yang Chuanbua, who was standing beside the stone tablet and at a loss. A complete spiritual root. The 3 Mount Heads reacted and were overjoyed. They flashed to Yang Chuanbua's side. What's your name? Li Guang restrained his temper and squeezed out a gentle smile on his face, which had never been smiling. Han Feng, who came with Li Guang, saw this scene and hurriedly stepped forward, saying, Master, his name is Yang Chuanbua, and I brought him up the mountain. Yang Chuanbua, a young man born in a barbarian land, had a complete water spiritual root. Han Feng was pleasantly surprised. This was a complete surprise. In this way, he would definitely get a large reward from his master, and he would also form a good relationship with Yang Chuanbua. My name is Han Feng, and you have to call me first senior fellow apprentice in the future. Looking at Yang Chuanbua, who was confused, the young man said his name with a smile, but he didn't even look at Su Li, who was favored by him before. Yang, would you like to practice with me? Li Guang couldn't wait to ask. Yuan Shu and Wang Yu changed their expressions and immediately stepped forward to stop him. Junior fellow apprentice. Chapter 333. For a time, the 3 high-ranking practitioners of Jindan realm argued endlessly for Yang Chuanbua in front of many disciples. It seemed that they would not stop for an hour. The steward of Wyman branch and the disciples of each peak all showed envy or jealousy. Unsurprisingly, the most dazzling one among this group of children with immortal latency was Yang Chunbua. At least in 10 years, Yang Chunbua would receive the highest level of training in the sect. Maybe it would not take 10 years for him to cross Lianqi realm from immortal and step into Zhuji realm in one fell swoop. Different people have different fates. The steward in charge of testing the spiritual root side and waved to Su Li, who was standing in the next position, indicating her to come to test the spiritual root. Su Li withdrew her gaze from Yang Chunbua and calmed herself down. Then she walked to the testing stone. She was a little surprised that Yang Chunbua had cultivation talent. However, when she thought that Yang Chunbua could pick up the parts of the reincarnation mirror in the Taishui River, which was almost dried up, Su Li felt that everything was reasonable. Yang Chunbua's cultivation luck seemed to be very good. While thinking, the steward had asked her to put her little hand on the testing stone. As soon as she touched it, a cold breath immediately penetrated into her body from Su Li's palm. It traveled in the meridians and pubic region, looking for the spiritual root that resonated with it. Su Li's eyes narrowed slightly. She separated a wisp of her spiritual power and condensed it into a silk thread. Then she split it into 1/10 of the thickness. After hesitating for a moment, she separated 1/10 of the silk thread and collided with that wisp of breath. The steward stared at the testing stone. Seeing that there was no response for a long time, he was about to impatiently drive Su Li to the side that failed. Suddenly, a red halo burst out of the testing stone. Although it was not a complete spiritual root, judging from the brightness, it had clearly surpassed 60% spiritual root and reached 70%. The quality of children with immortal latency this year seemed to be surprisingly high. The steward was stunned. Although he did not understand why the reaction of the testing stone became slow, it did not prevent him from showing a flattering expression and sending Su Li to the three peak heads. This little girl's talent was even higher than Jean Ying's. She was ranked second in this batch of children with immortal latent chance. She would definitely be taken in by the peak masters. Good. I didn't expect that among this batch of children with immortal latent chance, there are 4 good seedlings with spiritual roots of more than 50%, and this kid. Li Guang looked at the 4 ignorant children, and a look of joy flashed across his face. He was really happy for the sect. All these years, Senior Sister Sect leader had really put in a lot of effort to strengthen the sect. Even her cultivation was affected. Otherwise, how could... Thinking of this, Li Guang's face was slightly gloomy. Although it soon disappeared, it still did not escape Su Li's eyes. It seems that Huajian's sect is really in trouble. She lowered her head and stood obediently beside Jin Ying, and a thoughtful look flashed in her eyes. The 70% spiritual root was a complete accident. Before her battle prowess reached the level of her previous life, she didn't want to enter the line of sight of any gold core stage cultivator. But the heavens did not go according to one's wishes. After her rebirth, although she understood the power of the body of evil ghost, she had no idea how powerful it was. She only wanted to show 50% or even less of the spiritual root, but she didn't expect that the spiritual power reduced by 1% still made the testing stone resonate with 70%. It should be known that when she was the holy girl of Yushu sect, she was a peerless talent with 120% celestial spiritual root. But if she reduced her spiritual power to 1% in the 3rd hurdle of Lianqi realm to resonate with the testing stone, she might not even be able to test 20% of the spiritual root. Was her talent 7 times that of the original after her rebirth in this life? Thinking of this, Su Li frowned. 7 times the talent of the celestial spiritual root could at best reach the level of the inborn Taoist body, which was the top talent in the cultivation circle. However, the inborn Taoist body would not be regarded as a thorn by natural law. If the body of evil ghost was at the same level as the inborn Taoist body, then she would suffer a great loss. Jin Ying, standing beside Su Li, looked curiously at Su Li, who looked a little dull and was secretly perturbed. It seemed that this younger sister was not easy to get along with. In the blink of an eye, the sun went down. The spiritual root test that lasted for a day also came to an end. After Su Li, no one could reach more than 50% of the spiritual root. The debate among the three mount heads finally ended after the headmaster sent the specific arrangement. Yang Chunbo finally joined Li Guang's Fujian mount. Su Li and Jining both joined Danxia Mount's Wang Yu. Jin Wei, who had the worst talent among the four, became Yuan Shu's disciple. Both Li Guang and Wang Yu were very satisfied with the result. On the other hand, Yuan Shu's old face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. Jin Wei, who followed him, kept silent, but he was mad with depression and hatred. It shouldn't be like this. I am the first genius of Jin Cheng dynasty. There must be something wrong. Why could the poor boy and the two cheap maids enter the Naiman Mount of practice, but he ended up in the worst Naiman Mount? The huge gap made Jin Cheng extremely aggrieved, and he hated Su Li, the three of them, and the whole sect. The headmaster is too partial. I must ask for an explanation. Yuan Shu snorted coldly and left without taking Jin Wei with him. In the end, the black-clothed elder took him away from the spiritual testing site. Let's go back. Seeing the angry figure disappear, Wang Yufeng's eyes were slightly cold. She held Su Li and Jining in her hands and flew away with a smile. Master Su, Sister Su Yu, and I are from the same village. Yang Chunbo watched Su Li disappear in the sky and said reluctantly. Li Guang couldn't help laughing and touched the former's forehead with a kind face. Silly boy, when you step into Zhuji realm, you can fly on the flying sword. You can go to Danxiang Mount at that time. Practice hard. Yang Chunbo's eyes suddenly lit up, full of fighting spirit. He thought in his heart, Sister Su Li, I must become a practitioner in Zhuji realm as soon as possible, so that I can continue to protect you. Li Guang was old and shrewd. He knew what Yang Chunbo was thinking at a glance and nodded slightly. He was a person who valued friendship and righteousness. As long as he cultivated the relationship well, he would not be an ungrateful person. But Suyu, she only had a spiritual root of 70%. Although they fought fiercely for her, she couldn't even enter the sect with such qualifications hundreds of years ago. Without a complete spiritual root, the limit of this life was doomed. It was impossible to break through Zhuji realm and step into Jindan realm. As long as there was no accident, Yang Chunbo would definitely become a master of Jindan realm. At that time, after Yang Chunbo met the talented girls of the same generation as him, Li Guang shook his head slightly. Of course, he would not tell these things to Yang Chunbo. If he told Yang Chunbo now, it would only cause the new disciples disgust. When Yang Chunbo noticed the gap between him and Su Yu in the future, he would give him a little advice. After Su Li and Jining were brought to Danxia Mount by Wang Yu, they were settled down by the steward of the sect, and each received a set of the standard dress of the fourth-generation disciples of Qinghua Mount. The fourth-generation disciples were the general term for disciples in Yunyi realm who had not yet stepped into Lianqi realm. To put it bluntly, the 10th hurdle of Yunyi realm was to strengthen the physique and prepare to open the cyclone in the pubic region. It was also the limit that the handyman disciples without spiritual root could reach. Of course, the division of the fourth-generation disciples like Su Li and Jining was only temporary. For example, the small room in front of them. Su Li stood at the door for a moment, glanced at the empty room around her, and pushed the door in. The layout of the room was not exquisite, but it was clean and belonged to her alone. The steward who sent her here said that only disciples who had reached the 5th hurdle of Lianqi realm could have a separate room. If they could reach Zhuji realm and become one of the inherited disciples, they could move to a separate courtyard and recruit 2 handyman disciples as servants. They didn't have to do ordinary trifles in person to disturb their practice. In this way, it's convenient for me to restore my cultivation. Sitting on the edge of the bed and touching the soft mattress, this thought flashed through Su Li's mind. There must be gains and losses. Putting aside the distracting thoughts, Su Li got up and opened the package on the table. There were 2 sets of clothes and a token in it. Su Li's expression changed slightly. The Jinling mask in the secular world. Although this kind of precious light pink satin had no protective effect, it could be sold for hundreds of gold ingots in the secular world. The token was not simple either. It was made of special cyan spiritual wood and contained a one-time protective tactical matrix. It was very valuable. It seemed that Wang Yu was really ready to cultivate her and Jining carefully. Su Li's eyes showed a hint of contemplation. When she was brought to Danxia Mount by Wang Yu, she tried her best to shrink the spiritual power in her body. Relying on the natural concealment of the evil ghost, Wang Yu didn't find the abnormality. I can't see anything in Jinan realm. It seems that I won't be in too much danger as long as the Yuaning realm and Huajian sect doesn't come out. Su Li was slightly relieved. She put on a light pink disciple clothes, hung the token, and pushed the door to go out. But at the same time, a person happened to come out of the room next door. It was Jining, who had also changed clothes. Seeing Su Li, Jin Ying's eyes brightened slightly, as if she had found the backbone. She hurriedly approached Su Li, but felt it was inappropriate when she approached Su Li. She stopped and stammered after a long while, Su, let's go to the book pavilion together? I am a little scared. Jining felt a little embarrassed after saying that. She was 1 year older than Su Li. She raised her head and thought that Su Li would laugh at her, but Su Li's expression didn't change at all. She just nodded and said lightly, "Let's go together." Jining was delighted when she heard the words. She took 2 steps forward and held Su Li's arm. Su Li frowned and finally shook her head slightly and let her go. The book pavilion was in the palace group near the top of the mountain, several miles away from the residence of Su Li and Jining. Jining shrank beside Su Li and did not forget to quietly look at the many disciples in different clothes who passed by them, as well as the tall pavilions that she had never seen before. Finally, her eyes returned to Su Li, whose expression didn't change much. Although she felt that Su Li was born indifferent, it still made her feel safe. It seemed that as long as she was on Su Li's side, nothing would happen even if the sky fell down. More than an hour later, the two finally came to the book pavilion. Jining was panting. Although Su Li didn't consume much energy, she still needed to pretend. Chapter 334. Get out of the way. A low roar mixed with anger came along with the wind, and it was about to hit Jining, who had a look of horror on her face. At this moment, the gatekeeper disciple saw that Su Li was tripped by something in a panic. She pulled Jining to the side and just escaped the sharp wind. Lucky girl. The gatekeeper disciple breathed a sigh of relief. If she didn't fall like this, she would have to lie in bed for at least 2 months, although she wouldn't die from the impact of the wind. Thinking of this, he watched the young man in white rush into the pavilion with horror. Until he couldn't see the back of the young man, he breathed a sigh of relief. He walked over to pull up Su Li and Jining, who fell on the ground, and persuaded, "You two are unfamiliar. You should be new to the sect, right?" Jining rubbed her knees and burst into tears. Hearing the gatekeeper disciple's question, she nodded obediently and said in a clear voice, "Senior fellow apprentice, my name is Jining. I just joined the sect with junior sister apprentice Su Yu today. It turns out that you are the 2 girls. No wonder." The gatekeeper disciple suddenly realized. Then he looked around carefully. After confirming that there were no other disciples, he bent down and whispered, "Junior sister apprentices, listen to me. Come to the book pavilion tomorrow. The senior fellow apprentice who just passed by has a bad temper. If you annoy him, it will not be a good thing." Jining, who was a little scared, was even more scared after hearing this. She pulled Su Li's sleeve and whispered, "Junior sister apprentice, let's go." The disciple guarding the door was confused. Why was it that out of these 2 girls, the younger junior sister was the one making the decisions? Su Li was not interested in the practice methods in the book pavilion. She came here just to know what happened in Qing Shui's circle in the past 1,000 years. This matter was not urgent, and the book pavilion could not fly. It was the same to come back after she practiced for 2 days. "Let's go." After Su Li said this, she inadvertently glanced at the position of the windowsill on the 2nd floor of the book pavilion and then turned to leave. Jining quickly followed her. When they walked far away, the disciple guarding the door put away the friendliness on his face and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, with the help of Senior Brother Deng, the task assigned by Senior Sister was finally completed. At the same time, the white-clothed young man standing by the windowsill on the second floor couldn't help but sneer when he saw this scene, and he muttered to himself in a low voice, "So it's because of these two little girls. Junior Sister, you're really becoming more and more backward as you live. You even dare to do such a despicable thing. Fine. That way, I won't have to worry too much about competing for rankings in the future." With this thought in mind, the white-clothed young man withdrew his gaze. Suddenly, his eyebrows knitted together. Just now, one of the two little girls with a lotus mark on her face seemed to have glanced in his direction. Could it be that she had sensed him? Impossible. The white-robed young man shook his head, wondering why he would have such a strange thought. Could it be that talking to Junior Sister you would make one stupid? When they returned to their residence, it was almost noon. Jeaning touched her shriveled belly with a look of grievance. She whispered, "Junior Sister Apprentice Sue, what should we do? Yesterday, the steward clearly asked us to go to the book pavilion to copy the mental methods of Yeni Realm, but I didn't expect." Suli glanced at her and shook her head. "We'll go tomorrow. You go to eat first." Jeaning nodded and was thinking about what to eat with Suli. Suddenly, she saw that Suli turned around and walked to her room. She couldn't help but ask in confusion, "Junior Sister Apprentice Sue, where are you going?" Suli paused slightly and said without looking back, "I'm not hungry. You go alone." After that, before Jeaning could say anything, she had entered the room and closed the door, leaving Jeaning standing alone outside and at a loss. Back in the room, Suli walked to the futon and sat down. She breathed a long sigh of relief. Wang had been on the mountain last night. For the sake of safety, she didn't practice. Until she sensed that Wang Yu had left this morning and dealt with the matter of the book pavilion, she had time to restore her cultivation. Suli lifted her sleeve and glanced at the seemingly ordinary quaint ring on her wrist. As my cultivation improves, the effect of reincarnation mirror to shield the mysteries of heaven is getting worse and worse. It seems that I have to arrange the tactical matrix for deception as soon as possible. Thinking of this, Suli frowned. Setting up the tactical matrix was not a long-term solution. She couldn't stay in a fixed place all the time. She must find a magic weapon to shield the mysteries of heaven and carry it with her at all times in order to be at ease. But the magic weapon to shield the mysteries of heaven was so precious that it couldn't be bought in the cultivation market. The only feasible way in front of her now was to repair the ring of reincarnation mirror and improve its ability to shield the mysteries of heaven. My cultivation is not even enough to arrange the tactical matrix for deception, let alone reincarnation mirror. Suli smiled bitterly, shook her head to get rid of the distractions, and entered the state of meditation. To arrange the tactical matrix for deception, ordinary practitioners could barely arrange it at least at the 7th hurdle of Lianqi realm. Even with her tactical matrix realm, she needed to reach the 5th hurdle of Lianqi realm. Now her cultivation was at the peak of the 3rd hurdle of Lianqi realm, 2 hurdles away. While Wang Yu was not in Danxiao Mount, she needed to seize every minute and second, and she didn't bother to think about other trivial things. After a long time, Su Li, who was sitting on the bed, burst out the momentum of the 4th hurdle of Lianqi realm. The black spiritual power that escaped was all retracted into her body in less than 3 breaths, and the room became calm again. After a few breaths, Su Li's long eyelashes fluttered, and she opened her eyes. Finally, I broke through to the 4th hurdle of Lianqi realm. The speed is faster than I expected. At this speed, I can make another breakthrough and reach the 5th hurdle in 10 days. Murmuring, Suli pinched her fingers and found that only half a day had passed. She looked at the dark night outside and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, she pinched a strange black mark with one hand and spread it all over her body from her fingers, completely sealing the pneuma that had been restrained to the extreme to prevent the leakage of the pneuma that had just broken through from causing trouble. After doing this, Suli jumped out of bed and put on her clothes. She pushed the door open and was about to go out to inquire about the news. Suddenly, she saw Jining squatting on the wall beside the door and sleeping. She frowned. Why did Jining sleep in front of her door instead of her own room? Jining hadn't started practicing yet, so Suli didn't worry that the movement in the room would be noticed by the woman. But the woman's character was too weak. If she didn't change her character, she would die on the road of cultivation sooner or later. But what did the life and death of others have to do with her? Su Li's eyes were indifferent. The warm-hearted people had already died in the cultivation circle. Perhaps the sound of opening the door was a little loud, and Jining was woken up. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked up to see Su Li. She immediately stood up in a panic and waved her hand. I didn't mean to sleep here. Before she finished her words, Jin Ying's stomach growled untimely, which was heard by Su Li. Her face suddenly turned red, and tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. Jining, you are so useless. You don't even dare to go to the dining room alone. It's better to starve to death. Jining thought in despair. She raised her head and was about to explain to Su Li, but Su Li was not in front of her. She was stunned for a moment and saw that Su Li had gone far away, in the direction of the dining room. Her eyes suddenly brightened, and she quickly followed up. Hearing the footsteps behind her, Su Li's expression did not change. She was indeed going to the dining room. At this time, there were the most handyman disciples in the dining room. It was very convenient to use Jin Ying as a cover to inquire about the news. After a while, the two came to the dining room. At this time, it was the time when the handyman disciples finished a day's work and came to eat the spiritual food. The huge 3-story pavilion was so noisy that it could be heard clearly outside. Suli walked to the door without stopping and stepped in. The noise in the big hall immediately quieted down slightly. In the place where all the handyman disciples in gray clothes gathered, 2 girls in delicate pink clothes suddenly came in, which was really eye-catching. Being stared at by so many people, Jining suddenly flashed a panic in her eyes and hid behind Su Li. On the other hand, Su Li glanced at the audience indifferently and walked directly through the crowd to the spiritual chef to take 2 portions of spiritual food. After stuffing one into Jin Ying's hand, she found an empty seat and sat down. Jining followed and sat down. Looking at the spiritual food on the plate, which did not look very good, she swallowed her saliva and couldn't wait to start eating. She was so hungry. Suli didn't go out at noon, so she didn't dare to come to eat alone. In addition, she didn't sleep last night. She was tired and sleepy, so she fell asleep soon after sitting in front of Su Li's door. After others saw the two sitting down to eat, the noise in the hall became noisy again, but it was much smaller than before. Many handyman disciples looked at Su Li and Jining with respect and desire in their eyes. Anyone who stayed in Danxia Mount for more than 10 years knew what pink clothes meant. The boy who was valued by the Mount head must have a good cultivation talent. In a few years, these 2 girls would become disciples of the Naiman branch, or even inherited disciples. If they could build a good relationship with them, they might be able to make a meteoric rise and become their servants after they became inherited disciples. The status and power of the servants of inherited disciples of the Naiman branch were terrifying. Even ordinary disciples of the Naiman branch were not willing to offend them. Suli picked up a plump, round, soybean-sized rice grain and put it into her mouth. A fragrance with sweetness spread in her mouth. She hadn't eaten spiritual grain for a long time. Thinking of the time when she practiced in Yushu's sect, Suli was slightly nostalgic, but Jining was eating spiritual grain and didn't see it. Junior Sister Apprentice Su, what kind of rice is this? It's so delicious. I have never eaten such delicious rice. Jin Ying's eyes were bright. She said vaguely while eating. Suddenly, there was a sneer from the next table. You don't even know spiritual grain. I really don't know how you got into Danxia Mount. Hearing such sarcasm, Jin Ying's face turned pale. She looked at Su Li with embarrassment and a little guilt in her eyes. If she didn't follow them to eat, Junior Sister Apprentice Su Yu wouldn't be laughed at. Chapter 335. Su Li withdrew her gaze. That was the token of the personal maid of inherited disciples. No wonder she dared to be presumptuous in front of them. The leading girl saw Su Li's cowardly reaction and immediately mocked. You are really a little girl who has never seen the world. You don't stay at home to take care of your husband and children, but you also want to be an immortal? Be careful that no one will collect your corpse after you die. Jining grew up in the palace. Although she was not favored, she had never heard such outrageous words. Her little face immediately turned red with anger, and she couldn't help but stand up and scold. That's too much. You curse people to death. How did my junior sister apprentice and I offend you? Although what she said was reasonable, Jin Ying's voice was too low, and her weak expression made her look neither fish nor fowl. Seeing this, the four maids all trembled with laughter, which attracted the attention of the surrounding handymen, and then they looked away with fear. Although Su Li and Jin Ying were full of potential and were likely to become inherited disciples in the future, or even reach a higher level, it was only a possibility. These four maids were notoriously bad in Danshiamout. They were lucky enough to become the personal servants of inherited disciples. Even if they killed one or two disciples of Wyman branch with no potential, their master would cover it up. At present, although the four maids bullied the boy valued by the Mount Head, they just verbally abused him, didn't hit him, and didn't endanger his life. They could do whatever they wanted. The harsh laughter kept ringing in her ears. Jining was so angry that her whole body trembled slightly. She showed an indignant expression and was about to continue to argue. The leading maid with the silver token laughed enough. Seeing Jin Ying's reaction, her eyes suddenly became fierce and she snorted. Offend? I'm just telling the truth. Junior sister apprentice, you haven't officially practiced and you have already begun to lecture your senior sister apprentice? Do you really think that being favored by the Mount Head, you can command us handyman disciples and blame us at will? Jining was so anxious that her face turned red. She bit her lip and shook her head. I didn't. It's you. Shut up. The maid with the silver token looked gloomy. She was young, but her expression was somewhat frightening. Your senior sister apprentice is talking. You have no right to interrupt. As she said, she looked at Su Li, who was still eating silently and did not refute. She smiled and said, Learn from your junior sister apprentice. Sometimes it is not bad to be a coward. As she said this, she came close and pressed hard on Jin Ying's head. Jin Ying, who had not cultivated yet, was certainly not her opponent. She cried out in pain and almost knelt on the ground. This time, seeing that you're new to the sect, I'll let it go. The etiquette of the sect cannot be ignored. When you see me in the future, remember to respectfully call me senior sister. This is the first lesson I'm teaching you. No need to thank me. As she spoke, the maidservant with the silver token began to laugh, and the three maidservants behind her laughed even more wantonly. Under the terrified gazes of the many janitor disciples, they swaggered off. Jining stood there blankly. Even if she did not kneel down, she felt that her self-esteem had been destroyed, and tears fell down. Come and eat. But at this moment, Su Li's slightly cold voice came. Jining turned her eyes blankly and saw Su Li's calm face. The air stagnated for a moment, and Jining gritted her teeth and left angrily. Although she was timid, she disdained to be associated with Su Yu, who compromised and abandoned her dignity. Su Li was slightly stunned, and then shook her head. She bowed her head and continued to eat. She didn't have the leisure to waste time on buzzing flies. It was good for Jining to suffer more, so that she wouldn't stick to her all day long. After the storm passed, the lobby gradually resumed its hustle and bustle. Su Li concentrated her spiritual power on her ears, and all the whispers were clearly heard. Although many people were talking about what had happened just now, Su Li still got a lot of useful information after eliminating all the useless conversations. After confirming that there was no other useful information, she put down the bowl and chopsticks and left, ignoring the pity and disdain of other janitor disciples. Back to the wooden house, Su Li glanced at the closed wooden door next door and then pushed the door into the room. Today, Wang Yu's Numa was not on the top of the mountain, and she had not returned. She could practice well tonight. However, she didn't rush to practice when she returned to the bed. Instead, she took out a thumb-sized square stone in the heavy bag. Under the dim candlelight, the stone emitted a faint white light. This was the inferior spiritual stone. Janitor disciples could receive one inferior spiritual stone every month, which could speed up the practice of Yunny realm and Lianqi realm. But for Su Li, it was of little use. The quality of the black spiritual power produced by the secret records of Black Lotus that she practiced was too high. The spiritual power extracted from an inferior spiritual stone was purified by the secret records of Black Lotus. She estimated that only the low-grade spiritual stone could work for her. However, I can make it into a low-rank array talisman and sell it for some low-rank spiritual stones. It's just that with my current status, if I sell it once, it'll be fine. If I sell it multiple times, I'll definitely be targeted. Su Li frowned. She wanted to restore her cultivation as soon as possible, and the only easy way at present was to sell matrix runes. Tomorrow, I will go to the marketplace at the foot of the mountain. Maybe I can get something. Thinking of this, Su Li slowly entered the state of practice. She, who was focused on restoring her cultivation, seemed to completely forget one thing. Before dawn the next day, Su Li finished her practice. She put on the gray robe worn by ordinary janitors and went down the mountain. As for the origin of the gray robe, there were many ordinary gray linen clothes on Danxia Mount. Su Li casually took a set, and no one found it. It was not the time for the janitors to start work, so the mountain road was quite deserted. Only a few janitors went with Su Li. Other janitors glanced at Su Li, and no one said anything. The janitors who went down the mountain at this time did nothing but buy some daily necessities for their masters. After walking for an hour, she finally saw a little outline of the small marketplace hidden in the forest. She was slightly relieved. It seemed that the information collected in the spiritual dining house yesterday was right. Walking down the last stone step, Su Li came to the small marketplace. Both sides of the bluestone road were covered with stalls. Disciples of Danxia Mount in uniforms of Wyman branch and janitors sat on the ground, shouting like hawkers in the marketplace. Behind many stalls, there were small attics with simple decorations, which looked slightly upscale. At this moment, the sun had risen a little, and there were more and more people in the marketplace. Su Li in gray blended into the crowd inconspicuously. She walked around the marketplace and roughly figured out the structure of the marketplace. The structure was also simple. There were only two grades. The stalls on the ground generally sold daily necessities, such as fasting elixir and cleaning runes, while the attics sold things really related to practice. Su Li also saw a graded rejuvenation elixir in an attic called Wenyun Pavilion, which was marked with a high price of 50 low-grade spiritual stones. Although it was not a flawless elixir without impurities, it was enough to make any seriously injured practitioner in Zhuji realm recover to his peak state in a short time. I don't know if this elixir was refined by a disciple of Danxia Mount. If there is such a person, Su Li's eyes flickered, and she finally focused on the plaque of the attic in front of her. Jinlo Group. It's a little weird that there is a branch of Jinlo Group in Huajian sect. Jinlo Group was a mysterious force in Jiuzhou region, specializing in buying and selling materials and magic treasures related to tactical matrices. It had recruited more than 90% of matrix masters in Jiuzhou region. When she was the holy girl of Yushu sect, she was also a guest matrix master of Jinlo Group, so she knew better than others what a proud force it was. For a small sect like Huajian sect, it was impossible for Jinlo Group to send people to establish a branch. But now, an attic, which was obviously a branch of Jinlo Group, was in front of her, which made Su Li feel suspicious. Is it related to the tactical matrix I arranged? Thinking of the strangeness she noticed when she entered the sect, Su Li's immature face flashed with a trace of strange contemplation. Then she walked into the building with a large group of handyman disciples. The familiar smell of matrix materials poured into her nostrils. Su Li was refreshed and looked in the direction of the source of the smell. Sure enough, in a room with transparent walls, A matrix master was inscribing matrix patterns on a piece of low-grade spiritual stone. Judging from his technique, he should be a first-grade matrix master, which corresponded to Lianqi realm. The things he refined could only be bought by people in Lianqi realm. Many Wyman branch disciples of Danxia Mount stood outside the wall and watched, full of envy. It's so easy for matrix masters to earn spiritual stones, unlike us who take on the sex tasks and work hard to get such a little reward. Matrix masters are scarce, so they are naturally distinguished. You should be satisfied that you can be reborn from a mortal and step in a Lianqi realm. Skipping the whispers of the crowd, Suli came to rows of transparent cabinets, where various grades of matrix runes and more advanced matrix compasses were placed. Suli soon found the yellow matrix rune she wanted to refine and sell, one for 10 pieces of low-grade spiritual stones. Earth-based rune was a kind of matrix rune with extremely powerful defensive ability. Although it was expensive, as long as a practitioner in Lianqi realm who had adventured outside and had a decent family background, he must have a life-saving magic treasure with him. In addition, Suli turned her head and her eyes fell on another, smaller, cyan matrix rune, one for 15 pieces of low-grade spiritual stones. Agility rune could add the power of wind to herself, and it was a perfect match for escaping with earth-based rune. Suli's eyes showed a look of contemplation. A piece of low-grade spiritual stone could refine 2 agility runes, but it needed the cultivation of the 9th hurdle of Lianqi realm to support. Even with the spiritual power of secret records of Black Lotus, she estimated that she needed at least the 6th hurdle of Lianqi realm. I can only refine earth-based runes first and then make plans later. Although she didn't know the purpose of the existence of Jinlo Group, it would be much more convenient for her to sell matrix runes with this building in the sect, and the materials of the tactical matrix for camouflage might also be obtained through this building. Chapter 336. Back to her residence. Suli didn't see Jining again as she expected. She closed the wooden door and sat back on the bed. She took out the inferior spiritual stone and drew a straight line on the surface of the spiritual stone with a sharp silver light on her fingertips without any preparation. Clatter! The square stone was evenly split into 2 triangular stones. If they were weighed, it would be found that the difference in weight between the 2 stones would be no more than 1 yuan. Suli picked up a triangular inferior spiritual stone, closed her eyes, and thought for a moment. Then she murmured in a low voice. The earth nimbus floating in the nothingness slowly condensed on her fingertips, showing a little earthy halo. Sensing the rapid consumption of the spiritual power in her body, Suli didn't dare to waste time and quickly carved on the surface of the spiritual stone. Her speed was many times faster than that of the first-grade matrix master who was admired and envied by others during the day. After a few dozen breaths, the surface of the triangular inferior spiritual stone suddenly burst into a dazzling yellow light. After the light dissipated, there were delicate golden lines on the surface of the inferior psychic awareness, just like the most exquisite handicraft in the world. I made it. Suli sensed that the surging earth nimbus in the psychic awareness was integrated with the spiritual stone. She shook her sore arm, and a little blood appeared on her fingertips. Suli's face was slightly pale, and she shook her head helplessly. The spiritual power of the 4th hurdle of Lianqi realm was still too little. She couldn't afford a spiritual pen now, so she could only use her fingers instead of a pen. But her physical body had not reached the level of her previous life, and the consumption of spiritual power was more than 100 times that of holding a spiritual pen. If her physical strength hadn't reached the peak of Zhuji realm, her fingers would have been broken by force. After these 2 earth-based runes are sold, my cultivation can at least be restored to the 6th hurdle of Lianqi realm. 7 days later, it will be the beginning of next month, and I can get another inferior spiritual rune. When Suli was thinking, suddenly there was a knock on the door. She knew who was standing in front of the door without the psychic awareness. Suli hid the things on the bed, hid her injured hand behind her, and got up to open the door. Jining, who wanted to continue to knock on the door, immediately took a step back like a frightened rabbit. Then she reacted, forced a straight face, and said coldly, I'm not doing this for you. I'm just here to remind you. Don't forget that in a few days, Master will test our cultivation progress. Now 2 days have passed, and we haven't even gotten the mental cultivation method of Yeni Realm. You tell me, what should we do? Suli was stunned. Seeing her expression, Jining immediately felt dizzy and asked helplessly, You don't really forget it, do you? Suli pursed her lips and nodded slightly. How could she care about such a trifle? Jining was speechless for a while. Now she finally knew why Suli's performance was good or bad. Suli could forget the important things related to her own fate. So she was a fool. He didn't know what fear was, much less what humiliation was. It was no wonder that he didn't react at all when he was scolded by those 4 bad sisters. Did he misunderstand her? Jin Ying's imagination ran wild, and Suli gradually frowned. Anything else? Jining was confused by Su Li's question. She was so depressed that she wanted to spit out a mouthful of blood, but she couldn't help but tell Su Li what happened during the day. Today, I went to the book pavilion alone. Thinking of the first time she begged Su Li to go to the book pavilion with her, Jining blushed. She immediately thought of something and said angrily, Su Li, we are in trouble this time. Someone deliberately prevented us from getting the mental method of Yeni Realm. They simply wanted us to lose face in front of the master. Su Li raised her eyebrows, and the figure of the young man in white flashed in her mind. I went to the book pavilion today and saw the grumpy senior fellow apprentice again. But this time, I didn't listen to the advice of the gatekeeper disciple and entered the book pavilion. I thought I could get the mental method in this way, but the 4 bad sisters were also in the pavilion. Jin Ying's eyes turned red, and she didn't say anything. It was not difficult for Su Li to guess how the 4 maids with silver tokens bullied her. Naturally, she couldn't get the mental method. I see. After a moment of silence, Su Li simply replied and was about to close the door. Jin Ying's face was full of astonishment. She hurriedly stopped Su Li and said anxiously, Junior Sister Apprentice Su, are you really stupid or pretending to be stupid? Now we are in the same situation. If we don't get the mental method to practice, we will be in trouble when the master asks about it. Tomorrow, you go to the book pavilion with me. Maybe we... Su Li shook her head before she finished her words. I have something to do tomorrow. Let's go the day after tomorrow. After that, she didn't listen to Jin Ying's nonsense and forcibly closed the door. Jin Ying stared at the bare door blankly for a long time before she came to her senses. She was so angry that she stamped her feet and couldn't help but scold. Coward. Those senior sisters are right. Su Yu, you are a coward. When I get the mental method, I won't give it to you. Just wait for the master's scolding. As she said that, she kicked the door heavily. A sharp pain came from the tip of her foot. She sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at the silent night outside. She bit her lip for a while, feeling wronged, and finally limped back to her room. In the room, Su Li exhaled and held the second rune that emitted a faint golden light in her hand. She was concentrating on drawing runes just now, so she naturally didn't hear Jin Ying's cry. Early the next morning, Jin Ying still had a trace of fluke in her heart. She came to Su Li's door, but no one opened the door after knocking for a long time. She finally couldn't stand it anymore. The grievances accumulated in the past 2 days burst out like a flood. She squatted in front of Su Li's door and cried. After an hour, Jin Ying stopped crying. Looking at the still, silent wooden door, she showed a touch of stubbornness in her eyes. She wiped away her tears and got up to leave, heading for the book pavilion. At the same time, Su Li, who had been wandering in the marketplace for a long time, finally stepped into the Jinlo group. She trotted all the way to the empty window for purchasing materials related to the tactical matrix, took out an earth rune, and said crisply with a pure luster in her eyes, Lord, my master asked me to sell something. The old man sitting behind the window saw that the person who came was a little girl full of spirit. Although she was dressed in the clothes of a servant, the old man couldn't help but show a kind expression on his face because of the spirit and elegance she exuded. Everyone has a love for beauty. In a cultivation circle, good-looking people would also receive a lot of preferential treatment, which was an eternal truth. Well, let me see what your master is selling. The old man reached out to take the earth rune and couldn't help but chuckle after scanning it with his psychic awareness. It turns out to be an ordinary earth rune. The price of Jinlo Group has always been fair. It is priced at 6 low-grade spiritual stones. What do you think, little girl? Suli frowned secretly, but pretended to be surprised and said, Lord, please take another look. My master said that this earth rune is very different, so he is interested in it. Otherwise, with my masters, as she spoke, Suli suddenly covered her mouth, as if she had accidentally spilled the beans, and hurried to remedy it. The old man's eyes flashed. It seemed that the master of this little girl was at least a top-ranking inherited disciple in Huajian's sect. How could he be interested in the first-grade earth rune? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look more serious and observe the triangular matrix rune in his hand more carefully. The foundation of Jinlo Group was profound, and the elder was well-informed. Soon, he noticed a trace of strangeness, and his face changed slightly. He glanced at Su Li, who had an innocent face, in surprise and doubt. Then he stood up and said, Little girl, I will price this earth rune for 50 low-grade spiritual stones. Do you have other matrix runes like this? Su Li was slightly shocked. She didn't expect that the old man could offer such a high price, but she showed surprise on the surface. She quickly handed over another matrix rune with her eyes sparkling. That's all. My master only gave me 2. The old man put the 2 matrix runes together in his hands, and they were really integrated. His eyes shone brightly, as if he had found a rare treasure. He hurriedly walked to the depths of Jinlo Group with the matrix rune in his hands. Before leaving, he did not forget to hand over a heavy bag of spiritual stones to Suli. Suli glanced at the building and found that many people had noticed here. She hurriedly asked for help from the steward who gave her the spiritual stones. Lord, my master said that we must leave from the secret exit of Jinlo Group. The steward immediately understood and thought that the master of this little girl was really thoughtful. He had seen the attitude of the elder of Jinlo Group just now, so he naturally did not refuse Su Li's request and happily took her to the secret exit. Seeing this scene, many practitioners could only give up the idea of robbing in their hearts. After Su Li left Jinlo Group through the secret exit, she didn't stay any longer and immediately went up the mountain to return to her residence. 100 low-grade spiritual stones can at least restore me to the 9th hurdle of Lianqi realm. Su Li put the spiritual stones under the rush cushion and breathed a long sigh of relief. Then her eyes flickered, revealing a calculating look. It seems that the appraiser of Jinlo Group knows something. He will definitely investigate me afterward, but she had a clean background. No matter how Jinlo Group investigated, they would never find out her previous life. So, her fictitious master became more mysterious and made Jinlo Group afraid. In this way, she had time to recover. Even if Jinlo Group found out that she was the one who refined the matrix rune in the future, she would have recovered her cultivation at that time. What was there to be afraid of? Thinking of this, Su Li smiled slightly, picked up a spiritual stone, and quickly absorbed it. At the same time, in the addendum of Jinlo Group, the old man who appraised Su Li just now stood respectfully in front of a delicate woman in a palace dress, who looked about 30 years old, without saying a word. Soon after, the woman in the palace dress exerted force in her hand, and the earth rune made of inferior spiritual stones was immediately crushed. The old man's pupil shrank. When he was about to explain, the woman in the palace dress waved her hand and said, Needless to say, it is indeed the work of a matrix master who can inscribe the first-grade matrix on inferior spiritual stones. Chapter 337. When the old man heard what the woman said, his expression changed slightly, and he said nervously, After all, the big mountain-protecting tactical matrix of Huajian sect is left by that person. If it is really controlled by a tactical matrix master, it is too dangerous for you to stay here. You'd better go back. Calm down, Mr. Wang. The woman in the palace dress patted the powder in her hands and said with a smile, "Let's not talk about whether this is true or not. Even if Hua Yin really invites a tactical matrix master, she will not have the courage to open the third layer of this tactical matrix. The price is too low for her." Although the old man called Mr. Wang felt it was inappropriate, he could only nod. The woman in the palace dress held the remaining rune in her hand. After a moment of silence, she suddenly sneered, "I am determined to get the star-stacked tactical matrix. If Hua Yin is sensible, I don't mind exchanging with other tactical matrices. But if she is not sensible, I, Suzini, am not to be trifled with." Mr. Wang looked slightly serious and whispered, "Miss, we don't have much time. If Xinlo Group realizes it, I know." Suzini's eyes flickered. "Within a month, star-stacked tactical matrix will fall into my hands. When I get the inheritance of that place with this tactical matrix, I will surpass Su Zipei's soon." "Mrs. Wise." Mr. Wang flattered, and then frowned and asked, "The girl who sent the rune is a clue. Why don't we follow the clues?" "No." Suzini rejected without hesitation. "It is a critical period now. Don't make trouble. It is not good for us to anger the tactical matrix master." Mr. Wang felt it was very reasonable, and immediately gave up the idea of investigating Su Li. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. During these 5 days, the door of Su Li's room had never been opened. During this period, Jining came to find her, but she had to leave when no one opened the door. On the 6th day, when the first ray of light from the east shone on the wooden door, the girl in the room, who was like an old monk in meditation, finally moved slightly. She shook off the gray stone powder and opened her eyes. At this moment, strands of black lines suddenly condensed in her eyes that were as clear as the sky, transforming into a lifelike lotus that swayed in the void for a moment before dispersing with a loud bang. Su Li exhaled a long breath and waved her hand to set off a gust of wind, sweeping away the accumulated stone powder on the rush cushion. She looked at the dark spiritual lake in her pubic region, which had occupied 70% of the entire pubic region. Level 7 of Qi Disciple. Su Li frowned slightly and picked up the remaining 7 low-grade spiritual stones on the edge of the rush cushion. A full 93 low-grade spirit stones only let her advance from the 4th level of Qi cultivating to the 3rd level of Qi cultivating. Too slow. This kind of progress was far lower than her expectation. The unexpected joy of selling 2 earth-based talismans at a high price also faded in her heart. She originally thought that relying on these 100 low-grade spirit stones, even if she couldn't recover to the 1st level of foundation establishment, it would be more than enough for her to reach the 10th level of Qi refining. It should be noted that a practitioner with a complete ordinary spiritual root would consume no more than 49 stones from the first hurdle of Lianqi realm to Zhuji realm. Even in Yushu sect in the previous life, with her heavenly spiritual root, she only absorbed about 110 low-grade spiritual stones to successfully break through. But now, the change was too great. The speed at which she absorbed low-grade spirit stones was frighteningly fast. For ordinary aura refining cultivators, absorbing 1 low-grade spirit stone a day was already their limit. However, in less than 5 days, she had already absorbed close to 100 low-grade spirit stones. On average, she consumed 20 spirit stones a day. Su Li couldn't help but be speechless. She felt that the road ahead was difficult. It took her 100 spiritual stones to advance from the 4th level to the 7th level. She didn't know how much more it would take to advance to the 3rd level of Qi cultivating. Thinking of this, Su Li spread out her palm. With a thought, a group of dark spiritual power appeared in her palm. The extremely condensed black shone like a gem in the slightly dark room. No wonder. The quality of the spiritual power has reached the 4th level of foundation establishment. Of course, the low-grade spiritual stones are useless. I should be able to absorb the middle-grade spiritual stones now. Taking back the spiritual power, Su Li hesitated for a moment and injected a wisp of spiritual power into the ring of reincarnation mirror. In the past, when the quality of the spiritual power was still at the level of Lianqi realm, she had tried it, but the ring of reincarnation mirror did not respond at all. Now that the quality of the spiritual power had reached Juji realm, she wanted to try if she could repair the mirror ring slightly, so that she could save the energy of arranging the tactical matrix for camouflage. After 10 minutes, there was no movement from the mirror ring. Su Li was silent and continued quietly. With the consumption of the spiritual power in her body, her face gradually became pale. An hour later, Su Li's forehead was covered with cold sweat, and her body trembled slightly. The spiritual power in her body had been squeezed to the last drop. But at this moment, her eyes were as bright as day. Under her gaze, there was a trace of black luster on the surface of the originally dim ring of reincarnation mirror. If you didn't look carefully, you couldn't see it all. A faint suction came from the mirror ring. Su Li's eyes were slightly fierce. She grabbed the remaining low-grade spiritual stones with one hand, and the latter turned into powder in the blink of an eye. All the spiritual power flowed into the mirror ring through Su Li's body, and the spiritual power floating in the surrounding nothingness was directly sucked up. Not enough. Su Li clenched her silver teeth, almost bleeding, but she was already at the end of her rope. If she continued, it would consume her foundation, which was not worth the loss. Do I really want to waste all my previous efforts? Su Li was a little unwilling, but her reason prevailed. She slowly moved her hand away from the mirror ring. Suddenly, the black lotus ring appeared from the ring finger. The black lotus pattern slowly rotated, and an obscure and profound secret method was transmitted into the awareness sea. After understanding the meaning of the secret method, Su Li's eyes suddenly condensed. Without saying anything, she slapped the heart with a strange method. The severe pain affected the nerves, and Su Li's face immediately turned pale. Then she opened her mouth and spat out a mass of bright red blood. Blood from the heart. It would take at least half a month for her to recover after spitting out the heart blood. Black Lotus Ring, don't let me down. With a gasp, Su Li pinched her fingers with difficulty and pinched a gesture with a strange shape beyond the common sense of the human clan. At the moment when the gesture began, the shape of the blood mass floating in the nothingness suddenly changed and seemed to form the outline of a word. Crack, crack, crack. The finger bones constantly made unbearable sounds, and the severe pain made Su Li faint. But she understood that if she gave up now, it would really be a heavy loss. She had no way out. Crack! Su Li's movements were stiff, and she sweated like rain. Her little finger hung down softly. If it went on like this, she was afraid that before the gesture was completed, her 10 fingers would be broken. She must speed up. But the pain of speeding up would be increased 100 times. A ruthless expression flashed between her eyebrows, and her movements immediately accelerated. The continuous sound of bones cracking sounded like firecrackers. In just a few breaths, the blood mass in the nothingness turned into a word slave at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bright red blood suddenly turned dark, just like Su Li's black spiritual power. With the last strength, Su Li gritted her teeth and sent the blood mass into the ring. Then, regardless of the result, she fainted on the rush cushion. After a long time, Su Li frowned and opened her eyes. Thinking of what happened before she fainted, she woke up quickly and sat up directly. Jining, who was holding the porridge bowl, was startled. Jining threw the porridge bowl to the bed. Su Li subconsciously wanted to catch it, but this movement made her 10 fingers hurt so much that she almost fainted again. Seeing that the porridge was finally spilled on the bed without burning Su Li, Jining breathed a sigh of relief. She quickly took a rag to wipe the bed and whispered, "Don't worry. I didn't tell anyone that you are hiding here. No bad guys will find it." Su Li was stunned and didn't know why. Jining had leaned over and looked at Su Li's hand distressingly. She said tearfully, "Those people went too far. They didn't allow us to practice and hurt you like this. Don't worry. Why become stronger in the future? I will definitely avenge you." Hearing Jean Ying's words, Suli understood that this girl probably blamed her injury on the 4 maids with silver tokens. She looked down and saw that her 10 fingers were well bandaged, and the blood on her body was cleaned up. It was hard to imagine how a princess who grew up in the imperial palace learned these things. Her psychic awareness covered her whole body, and a feeling of weakness arose spontaneously. She frowned. The spiritual power lost in the pubic region had not been replenished in time. But when her psychic awareness flowed to her wrist, she couldn't help but smile slightly. The ring of reincarnation mirror had a feeling of being connected with her heart and blood. In this life, she was no longer a puppet in the hands of reincarnation mirror. Even one day in the future, she could become the real owner of reincarnation mirror. Even if reincarnation mirror became a broken thing now, it still didn't hinder Su Li from being happy. One day, she would wake up the mirror spirit. She must get back what happened in the illusion. It was not her style not to take revenge. When she looked up and saw Jean Ying with a worried face, Su Li's cold eyes became a little more gentle. Indeed, Su Li never claimed to be a righteous person. For the sake of practice, she did something out of line without any psychological burden. She had always been indifferent to strangers, but once someone got her approval, Jean Ying was only 15 years old. It was normal for her to be afraid when she entered the sect at a young age, so she was more dependent on Su Li. But she was in trouble and didn't want to have cause and effect with others. So, her attitude towards Jean Ying was naturally very indifferent. But this girl, even if she was rejected by Su Li again and again, she still saved Su Li without hesitation when she saw Su Li sneaking into the room. Maybe it couldn't be called saving, and maybe this way was stupid, but there was no doubt that she had won Su Li's favor. She looked up at Jean Ying with a faint smile and teased, "I remember someone said that she would never talk to me, a coward." Jean Ying's little face immediately turned red, and she stammered and retorted, You must have heard it wrong. I didn't say that." After saying this, Jean Ying suddenly froze, and then looked at Su Li with great shock. Su Li was stunned, and then asked with a smile, "Is there anything on my face?" No. Jean Ying opened her mouth slightly, and finally confirmed that what she saw in front of her was not an illusion. She said blankly, You actually smiled." After joining the sect for so many days, she had never seen Su Li smile, let alone talk to her so gently. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.